Are we Gucci? Or no? It's kind of loud. It's kind of loud. Okay, we are Gucci. Boom, boom. Let me get set up real quick. Open up a chat. Okay. That's really loud. Bum, 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 bum. Discord. Okay. Bum, 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 bum. Can we update our levels and we're caught up? Ain't gotta do shit, boy. Not gonna be a particularly long stream. I do have plans later on. Gonna be chilling with a friendly acquaintance of mine. We'll say that. But it's not until like 11 though, like 11:30 or something. It's like after she's done work, so. We do have some time, so I figured might as well come see what's going on. No, I don't think we missed too much. Probably watch like the new episode of All In. And then when we're out here, we're at this bitch 362 362. I mean, in terms of yesterday's juice box, I mean, we kind of talked about this, right? Like kind of flipping when we changed the level now, but we talked about like flipping this kind of zone. Look, if you got in on it, you're still moving up with this trade, so shout out to you. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, Chris, we're gonna make it to our next TP, right? Are we about to make it up here before I get off? That'll be kind of nice. Some little juice to end the day. 6-2. Oh, that's the wrong one. EQ 62018. 61214. Interesting. I mean, we do have an outside day. Oh, it is the weekend. Interesting. It's a world where we start to fail here, right? Ding, 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 ding. Interesting. I'm gonna market this thing anything out. And what else was I gonna do? Oh yeah, yesterday's VWAP. Where's that dying? Interesting. Curious what the low time frame liquidity is looking like, but worry about that later. Later. Lyle Borger, yo, market rip Monday or dump? Look like you want me to answer that. I think I got a crystal ball or something. Okay. Close this. Boom, 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 boom. I kind of fuck with this song, right? Just kind of vibe out for a sec while we look at some of this data. 616.
Watch it go.
Valerie looking kind of juicy. Let's lower this. Yesterday's POC and then like over here, both looking quite juicy. How's the order book? How is the order book? Thing is a bit lower probability of seeing this play out on a weekend. Well, actually, I wouldn't even say a bit, probably like, I don't know, 30-something% chance that's likely to happen or something. Enough that it's noticeable, we'll say that. The spot order book is empty to the downside, interesting. Interesting. Okay, we'll look at this one last thing, then I'll have to answer. I have so many messages I need to fucking respond to. Get like a too many messages to respond to. And like the more I get when I haven't answered the ones I already had, like it just makes me like that much more like fucking like anxious basically. Oh my god, I don't wanna do this. I'm just trying to chill. Gonna chill, boy. Yeah, I think we're all caught up. Yeah, we've already talked about everything else. So now we have any new context that we didn't cover from last stream. Interesting. Okay. Okay, we are Gucci. I don't think there's anything particularly relevant we need to mention. Also the alts, right? You see, some of these things were kind of moving, especially hype. I'm in a long in for hype and soul right now as well, although not like comparable to the biddy long. Or some of these other things doing. I haven't been tracking alts at all for the longest time. The first time I really looked at them was like earlier this week in a while. Aside from the ones that are like on the screen. Oh, interesting. Anyways, let's get this thing going. We'll put an alarm like right there.
It's your podcast, your favorite podcast.
How long is this thing? An hour 42. Okay, we'll definitely, even if we watched it like the regular speed, we'll be done by. We'll have some time to spare. We'll put it at 1.5. If nobody's got any questions or anything, any questions or not, then we can chill. Or should we leave this? We'll do it like this, I guess. Oh, where's my OBS? We'll pause this. Over here.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 podcast in the world. It's your favorite podcast. It's your podcaster's favorite podcast. It's the All In Podcast, episode 279. With me, Friedberg, Sachs, Chamath. You know the squad. You know the squad. We're here. It's the summer, and we're ready to rock and roll. We got a power docket. We got a rocket docket. Palantir and NVIDIA have announced a sovereign AI partnership. Where have we heard that term before? Palantir is going to use NVIDIA's Nemotron, like the Pixar film, open models to build a custom frontier quality model to serve the U.S. government. Palantir is calling this new platform Sovereign AI Operating System. The U.S. government agencies will own the hardware, the data, and the model weights. Palantir also shared a viral tweet manifesto laying out the concept. Data retention is your treasure. Transfer it at your own peril. Transferring that data hands over access to your pre-existing winning plays and yields the means of production for new ones. CEO Alex Karp went on CNBC to announce the partnership in a classic Karp Robin Williams style monologue. Here's a clip from his 20-minute interview where he basically went after the frontier models.
This guy was ranting, right?
Our clients are just, to say they're unhappy with the Frontier Labs is to say I'm welcome at the Berkeley faculty. It's like there's just a level of discomfort and loss of trust. Sam and Dario, there's nothing more fun than debating Dario in private. So I'm not throwing shade at them, but something has gone completely wrong. And the basic view among enterprises in this country is I'm going to chillax and waste my time with tokens. I'm going to get no value, and they're going to get my IP. When the Department of War goes to you and says, I need this application, do they get to control the weights to do it, or do you get to control the weights? Are we really going to outsource the battlefield of this country to the consensus view in Silicon Valley? That is effing insane.
All right, and so some folks refer to this as a televised nervous breakdown. We here at All In call that Alex Karp on a Tuesday.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know about
that. Sachs, Friedberg, we talked about this a whole bunch. Back in February, I coined the term intelligence sovereignty. Here's your victory fact. Do I want to give all of the secrets in our organization, every piece of intellectual property, to Sam Altman, who's got to make $1 billion a year to keep up with his spend, right? He's going to build every application. I've been talking about AI sovereignty here for a bit, just in terms of how much more cost effective it is and how you're not training other people's AIs with your knowledge and your insights. This is why it's super important that open source agents and local hardware be able to run these models, and that consumers and companies learn how to roll their own language models. The intelligence sovereignty is different than privacy. Privacy is, oh, you can't see my photos, you can't peek into my notes app and what I wrote there in my journal. Intelligence sovereignty is, you can't tell me what to think. You can't use your AI to analyze my photos, to analyze my emails, to analyze my messages, and tell me how to interpret the world. That's actually going to be the next key piece here. All right, and Sachs, you are in.
Have any of you guys been seeing this trending story about that AI that you can use to basically track people down online? And it's like incredibly efficient at it. You put in like a photo of them, and it just scours the internet for anything related to them. I think it's a photo in the name, something like that, or it could just be photo. I don't recall the full story, but yeah, hunt people down via your digital footprint.
Another long post this week from you on this very topic, and obviously as AI czar there for the first half of the Trump administration. You've been very involved and very close to this. I would love to hear inside. I'd love to hear your take on this and your long posts, over 300 words. You can follow x.com/David Sacks, but also like the palace intrigue here and what this means in terms of the relationship with the government, which we're going to get into in our second story.
Well, look, Jake, I got to give you some credit there. The first part of your take was spot on. After that, it was kind of diminishing returns. I'm not sure why we had to listen to the next 30 seconds of it. But anyway, it started off really strong. But let's go back to the supposed crash out by Karp on CNBC. It was nothing of the sort. It was all these legacy media types making that claim. And that's the first clue that he's actually saying something insightful and maybe kind of brilliant. And I think the thing that he said that I hadn't really thought about in quite those terms is he started talking about AI safety in the enterprise and what that really looks like. And what he said is that what technical customers want is control over their compute, their models, their data stack, and their alpha, meaning their proprietary knowledge. They want to know they own the means of production, he said, and it's not being transferred to someone else. And what he's referring to there is that these enterprises are at risk of transferring their knowledge, their know-how, their trade secrets, their customer data to these model providers who might eventually decide to compete with them, like you said, JCal. And you can see that enterprises are waking up to this threat and they're not happy.
Yeah, like didn't like Claude partner with like who did they do it with? It was like Figma and it was somebody else, right? Like and then they just released like a Claude design. Snakes in the grass.
About it. And I think Karp is exactly right about that. Now, I think this is a really interesting take on AI safety because what safety means for an enterprise is, again, that they get to control their own data, their model weights, their compute. So a frontier lab can't hoover up their proprietary knowledge, their alpha, and turn it into their next product. And if you don't think that can happen, just look at what happened to Figma. So according to the information, Anthropic, quote unquote, blindsided its then business partner with the launch of Claude Design. So this was a new vertical app that Anthropic launched to compete in the design category. And
but there's another company too, wasn't just Figma.
To be honest with them, Anthropic's chief product officer had actually even served on Figma's board and didn't resign until 3 days before the launch of Claude Design. So obviously Figma again felt blindsided by this, and you can see the resulting impact on their stock price. Figma stock has fallen something like 50% this year, while Anthropic's valuation has surged. This is not an isolated example. Anthropic has also launched Claude Science, Claude Security, Claude Legal, Claude Financial, and of course Claude Code. And every single one of these vertical apps expanded into categories that was previously served by companies building on top of Anthropic's own models. And really, if you want to go back to when Anthropic's revenue explosion began, it was with the launch of Claude Code. And how did they know to launch that product? Because they saw that Cursor was doing extremely well. Cursor was one of their biggest customers. They created the coding assistant first. They created that category. And Anthropic said, oh, like, why don't we vertically integrate? So in other words, they're watching where the value is being created on top of their models. Then they're moving in directly. And this is a formula that I think is very Microsoft-like. You could say it's very Google-like. They want to dominate the model layer. You could call that the operating system, and then use that position, that monopolistic position, to capture the most lucrative vertical. So if you want to think about like the Microsoft example, they had the Windows monopoly, and then systematically they went and dominated every lucrative category of business software. It started with spreadsheets and word processing, and then eventually went to the browser, so forth and so on. If you want to look at Google, they basically had a monopoly or dominant position in search. And if you go back to the early days of Google, the search results kicked you off site. And in fact, they really prided themselves on how quickly they could send you off site, but gradually over time, they used that traffic to tell themselves where to build properties. And today, fewer than half of searches kick you off site. You stay on Google properties. And I think something similar is happening with Anthropic here. The pattern is clear. They are going to use their dominant position in the model to then grab more and more territory in any interesting and lucrative vertical. So again, back to Alex Karp's point, if you're an enterprise customer or a developer, why in the world would you ever want to share any proprietary data with them? You are mortgaging your future. You are sealing your fate. You are going to lead to disaster for your company. Just one last point, and I'll turn over to Jake Al, is that Dario, at the same time that they pursue this business strategy, has been arguing that open source models are dangerous and need to be restricted. Well, dangerous to whom? Not to enterprises that want to retain control over their data. It's dangerous to his business model because his business model requires that customers don't have a lot of choice at the model layer. And what Karp is pointing out here,
the other thing about that is like, there's like a temporal aspect to this argument, this debate point. Because like, okay, sure, right now, like the frontier models might be like further ahead than like the open source ones. How do we chart this? Whatever, I guess what I'm getting at is like that as time passes, like the open source models are going to converge on like the top tier models in terms of like intelligence. At least for like what we deem current standard of intelligence, not like inventing new things, like coming up with new mathematics, physics, like, materials, etc. But in terms of just like the know-how knowledge that already exists on the planet, that they are all going to converge to just having that, right? And then at that point, it's just a matter of who can serve it at a lower cost. And it just seems like inevitable in some regard.
As an enterprise, you have to retain the ability to choose at the
Also, we'll try to leave this. Very curious if we start to fail here, right? Because we are right at the value high for both of these things. Very interesting. We are starting to fail right now. So we'll have to wait and see, right? Does it just end up consolidating a bit, or do we actually start breaking down here? No, we're not. We're not.
the model layer, who gets to see and use your alpha.
Yeah, this is well said. I think you picked that carcass to the bone a bit, but Chamath, you're actually doing specific examples of this at 8090. You've been testing some of the open source models. I saw you share that on Twitter X. So maybe you could give us a little feedback on what you've learned as the CEO of 8090 and your firsthand experience now with using open source for the first time in the last couple of weeks for this specific use case in enterprises.
When you start a company, I mean, you guys all know this, you're not starting it for the moment that exists today. You're almost sort of trying to forecast if such and such a set of things happen, then here is the scene that gets created, because it takes time to build something and it takes time to get enough reps to know what you're doing in your go-to-market. This, for me, was the moment that I thought would arrive, which is the point where everybody wakes up and realizes, wait, hold on a second. Two things are true. The first is that my business is complicated. I want AI to be able to accelerate it, but I want to be able to protect myself in doing so. And then the second is I want the flexibility where there's an independent third-party control plane that I use to get all these benefits so that I don't leak and cede my advantages away. And I think Alex is an incredible, smart, brilliant guy, and he completely nailed it. And I think he called out on its face the huge risk of this. So let me just give you this narrative in 3 tweets. The first one is I read this really interesting study from BCG. And what they looked at was the return on capital employed, or ROCE, of various businesses. And this is what's incredible. The cost of capital has now, with long-term rates, moved back to what its long-run average is, which is around 8 to 11%. What that means is that is the actual cost that you would borrow money at effectively. The problem is that half of large US companies now cannot deliver returns that exceed that. That is a really big problem. And then second, there's a further problem, which is that persistently low returns, so in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, is about 1 in 7 companies all around the world. Okay, so why is this important to note? It means that being in business is complicated. It's hard. Not everything works all the time. There's a bunch of underperforming businesses. There's a bunch of underperforming segments. So in that lens, when you think about what Zach said, which is you have this company that comes to you and says, I have a magic box. And all you have to do is tell me everything you're doing, and this magic box will make everything better. But then all of a sudden, from the shadows, the magic box says, you know what, I've decided to compete with you. That is a huge risk. And now that you've seen enough examples of it, I think you have to figure out a different way to do it. So then you go to the next tweet that I saw, which I thought was interesting. And this is one
the thing I don't get about why, I find it a bit odd that people are so up in arms about it. Because this is known, right? The stuff that this guy from Palantir was talking about, everyone already knew this. If you look at the IGB, it's been nuking, right? Yeah, there was a bit of a rally recently, but not looking particularly hot. Kind of just been rolling over under the 200 for a while. And this is when we saw the advancement in the frontier models, right? So I think it's fair to say that this is not some new development or some new narrative that wasn't present before.
And what she essentially says is hey, hold on a second. There is this assumption that you can't use an open source model because it's all Chinese. And what she says was, well, even if it's 100x cheaper, and their response is no, because we care about safety and security. And her perspective is, don't you understand that you can actually host open source models with your own GPUs in US data centers that doesn't share any data back to anybody? And instead, what you're accidentally or purposefully doing is giving away all your data to a couple of frontier labs rather than owning it privately yourself. And 100x, it turns out, is a really big number to pay to do all of that by accident. And that's what Alex Karp is saying. He's like, why would anybody do this when there are alternatives? And so the third post that I'll talk about is something that we did. So we took our software factory, which is an agnostic third-party control plane, and we just wanted to see. And we ran it on a very typical enterprise task, which is you have an old piece of code you want to migrate it, and you want to maintain it in a new framework so that it's easier and more flexible. Pretty straightforward task. And so we ran it, and we ran an experiment where we did Claude by itself, then we did us plus Claude, and then we ran it on the best frontier open source model, and then us plus that model. And the data is crazy. So when you use our harness with Claude, it was simultaneously 1.4x cheaper and 1.5x faster than just using Anthropic Opus 4.8 alone. But if you wrap the open source model with our software factory, it was 16.4x cheaper. Now, it was 3 times slower, but you're talking about a couple of extra hours to save 16.4x.
So on that one, the slowness, Chamath, is that slowness because of the hardware being served up by Claude, or is it
this
the
is all
software
using
layer?
OpenRouter? No, this was all using OpenRouter on a very traditional hardware stack. So look, I think the reality is, could that be optimized even further? Absolutely. But my point is, if you take Sax's points and then if you take Alex Karp's point and just this actual data, there is a very legitimate question, which is, if you are a reasonable company, why are you not finding an independent way to access this intelligence in a way that doesn't leak your edge away? To do so at this point now is kind of becoming derelict and irresponsible. Back then, you could be experimenting because you didn't know any better. But now when you know all of these data points, to continue to make the same decision, I think is really insanely dumb.
All right, Dave Friedberg, you are also a CEO of the surging Ohalo.
Interesting. Everybody's
And
interesting to
you
see how
have-
this develops, right? So I think a lot of companies are doing is they have like an LLM router essentially. So like you're just some random user, right? And you put in your query into like the router model, and then like this decides we'll try a bit better. But like the prompt gets sent here, and then it decides what model to send the prompt to. So it doesn't like inefficiently use tokens on things that don't need to like use the frontier model. So like, that could really hurt some of these like OpenAI and Anthropic, right? Like, if you're not doing like world-class research or anything like that, you really need to be using the best model for literally everything. Especially as like the previous generation models are getting better and better as time passes with the new ones coming out.
A lot of
Interesting.
proprietary
Interesting to
data.
see how
Let
things
me ask you
develop.
point blank, do you trust your data?
Because I don't know, the way I'm envisioning it, I suspect that eventually like OpenAI and Anthropic and whatnot, like where they're really going to start making crazy amounts of money, and like Google is from trying to develop proprietary things themselves, like new drugs, new whatever, from their models. And they're not going to release it to the public.
To the frontier model companies? Or are you doing what
We'll see.
there seems to be consensus here, protecting your data, protecting the crown jewels, so to speak, and using open source? Are you experimenting with it? And just yes or no, do you trust the frontier models with Ohalo's data?
So I'll tell you, there's been an effort by Anthropic to go around and sign up life sciences companies to contributing to a new life sciences focused model. That effort has been, they're approaching these large companies with large proprietary data sets and saying, hey, if you show your data, we will give you early access, some sort of proprietary value, sign this NDA, and you can participate with us. And I think nearly everyone I've spoken with has woken up to the fact that they are basically trying to commoditize everyone's business. Because fundamentally, if all of the tens of billions of dollars you as a life sciences company have invested in experiments and product development, and you've generated all of this proprietary data along the way, that data is a true asset of your organization. It's an asset that you've spent billions of dollars developing. And by handing it over to a model company to then combine with other people's data, you are effectively commoditizing the asset that you have, the one kind of core differentiation that you have. And so everyone is largely saying no. The way I see this evolving is very much in line with what Alex Karp suggested on CNBC. If you go back a couple of years, I think we all assumed there was going to be this large hub, large spoke model for AI model development and deployment, meaning there would be these very large clusters. These large clusters would be ultimately capital advantaged. So those who had the most capital, which is why everyone's raised tens and hundreds of billions of dollars, would be able to train models. And then there would be these large spokes, these large clusters for deploying those models with inference. So everyone's using the neoclouds and the hyperscalers and whatnot to run models. And then maybe they've got their own proprietary data layer that sits in front of that. But I think what everyone's realizing is they're better off developing their own weights and their own models using either an open source basis, or there might be some intermediary business model that evolves, meaning there will end up being several large hubs that do all of the core foundational model development, then smaller hubs, meaning like clusters for training, that enterprises will use to train and develop their own proprietary advantaged models using their own data. And then there will be these much more distributed spokes, because I think everyone's also realizing the value of on-prem. By putting a set of servers and building a cluster in your own data center or even in your own enterprise, IT closet, you can run a lot of the workflows that you're using AI for your enterprise locally. And so I think the model is shifting where we're going from large hubs, large spokes, to large hubs, medium hubs, and then a distributed spoke model where there will still be, neoclouds and hyperscalers that are being used for inference, but people will also have their own inference instances that they're going to run for their own enterprise setting. And everyone, I think, is walking this path, and they're going to walk this path over the next couple of months, because they're realizing quite quickly that in order to compete in a world of commoditizing knowledge and commoditizing capabilities, you have to leverage the core differentiating assets that you have, which means you have to build your own models, and you will likely end up having to run your own inference with your own proprietary models.
Yeah, and to just give a little bit of texture to how that's going to look, if you follow the Microsoft example, which we've talked about here before, Lotus 123, WordPerfect were their partners. They were replaced with Excel. They were replaced, obviously, with Microsoft Word. You don't even know those other two, WordPerfect, WordStar, Lotus 123, VisiCalc. That's exactly what they have to do. And they have no choice but to do that now because they have $1 trillion market cap. They must win the application layer. And Sam Altman went to Y Combinator and he said, we'll give you $2 million worth of free tokens. And I came out and I said, listen, there's nothing personal against Sam. You know, Sam's a very aggressive deal maker, and he wants to get access to those startups because he knows, having run Y Combinator, that if he can get their innovations, those founders' latest thoughts about what's around the corner, he can incorporate them into the platform. There is no free pizza. There's no free beer. When somebody like Sam Altman comes to you and says, here's some free tokens, your alarm should go up. Zuckerberg did the same thing. He said, hey, I'm going to give people a bunch of access, going to give them money, come to the Facebook platform. Nobody who went to bed with Microsoft in the 80s, Facebook in the 2000s, or Sam Altman now in the 2020s did not wake up with their throat slit. This is a message to founders. If you partner with any of these people, they will slit your throat and take your business wholesale. There is nothing to discuss here. Don't trust them. Use your own models.
I think it's less Sam and OpenAI, to be honest. I think that the diversity of OpenAI in terms of its revenue streams and specifically its consumer business may actually be its savior. In a relative value basis right now, OpenAI equity, I think, is more reasonably priced than Anthropic equity. And the reason is not because of the quality of the models or the teams, because they're both excellent teams. But the reason is that OpenAI can fall back on a really healthy consumer business.
Sure.
The difficulty that Anthropic is going to face is that I think what Sachs said is true, that they have lost this fundamental trust about being able to stay within their sandbox. And if you consistently demonstrate this tendency to learn and then to try to disrupt your host organism, eventually you get sort of pigeonholed and you get cornered and people find ways to work around it. And so, look, I sent that text that I had about that post that I had about our testing of our harness on these Chinese models to somebody well-known in the industry. And he says, look, if you also add some post-training with all of the telemetry that you're going to get from the harness itself, he's like, I suspect you'll find that it gets as good as Mythos. And I thought, well, if that's true, then why don't I just take GLM, control it entirely soup to nuts on my own hardware inside of the United States with only US citizens that can touch it? It just seems like the brain dead obvious thing to do. And it's much, much cheaper.
Yeah, and 100% correct. I will say, if you're going to do this, you'll eventually wind up rolling your own LLM. I mentioned a company, Abacus, goabacus.co, that we seeded in our accelerator. What they're doing now for HIPAA compliant people is they're actually giving you this Go1 box. They're literally saying, we're going to make your own model for you. So once you start this, you start with Claude and use their wrapper and everything, or OpenAI's. Then you move on to the next step. The next step is I'm going to use an open source model, use my own, try to find a harness, et cetera. Where you will eventually wind up is you're going to fork these models, you're going to build your own. That is the end state, on-prem, on your own hardware. Don't trust anybody because there's too much at stake. You cannot risk your entire business. You might as well be part of the vanguard and start investing here. You're going to slow down to speed up is what's going to happen. Whether you're using 8090, Abacus, or any of these other solutions or rolling your own, you must have AI sovereignty, you must have intelligence sovereignty, or you're just giving your business over to your competitors. The only company at scale that's ever respected the developer community in this way is Apple. Apple took a very strategic approach to wanting to build an app store business, to wanting to support developers. And they explicitly told people, if you make something super obvious that you can build in a week or two, it eventually might wind up in our basic collection of apps, the stock app in your iPhone, the Notepad app in your iPhone. Those apps are incredibly basic. But if you looked at Robinhood's or Google Finance, and then you looked at something like, say, Evernote back in the day, which was an advanced note taker, it took 10 years for Notepad to add the features that Evernote had 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. They specifically slowed their apps down to make them simple for users and not F with their ecosystem because they want to take the 30% tax. That's your choice here. There is no 30% tax here when it comes to Anthropic. There is no 30% tax equivalent with OpenAI.
The thing with Apple is that Apple was renting distribution. This is not renting distribution. This is where you're renting intelligence and judgment. And so the problem that a company has is you can't rent the same. This is why your point is actually right. I think it's for a different reason. You can't rent intelligence from the same place that rents it to your competitor.
Correct.
You just can't. You can't. It's just stupid.
It will overflow. It will go over the wall into your competitor's lap.
It becomes a lowest common denominator problem where you and your competitors now look exactly the same. Why would you do that? And again, if you go back to that thing that BCG identified, so many companies are already teetering on a very difficult position where they cannot generate returns on their invested equity. And so why would you then go and pay all this money so that you end up with the same answer as your competitor? You can't do it. It's just not a choice.
And Sachs, part of what's going on here is the deflationary nature of technology. Every single one of these tools is getting cheaper. Tokens are getting cheaper, Sachs.
Thing is, I don't know, like... seems a bit overblown, right? Like, okay, in the case of like a Figma or like a, designing things visually, like a Photoshop, for example, like editing photos, okay, yeah, that's going to be hard to like not be consumed by like AI and Claude or Anthropic. Because you don't need any data for that, right? You don't need any proprietary data to be doing that. It's a different story when you're running a company that's using data to do something. So like, yeah, sure, like, did they fuck over Figma and whatnot? Yes. But, like, I don't think that argument isn't necessarily applies generally to everything.
Role in all of this. They have something called Nemotron. You can try it if you use Perplexity. You can just pick the drop-down menu. It has deep thinking. You will not be able to tell the difference between Jensen Huang's open source LLM stacks and Claude for 95% of your searches. I guarantee you. Now, why? Why has NVIDIA and Jensen downplayed their open source model until this moment? Why would he do that? Why would he never bring it up in the all interview? Never bring it up? Because his top customers were very concerned, from what I understand, about the fact that they had made so much progress on their open source model. But suddenly, after OpenAI announced their Jalapeno chips, after Anthropic started making chips, after AMD did successful projects with both of these companies, after Elon said he's going to do his own fab, NVIDIA's taking the gloves off, David. They are going to own the whole stack. They are going to be talking about open source a whole bunch. So maybe you could talk a little bit about NVIDIA and their role in this as the open source at scale full stack provider. You get the hardware from them, and you're going to get a model that's competitive with OpenAI's for free. And all you have to do is use one of their hosting companies, CoreWeave, whoever's buying NVIDIA's Colossus, et cetera. What are your thoughts on NVIDIA suddenly being willing to talk about their open source projects today?
Well, look, I think part of it is they need a time to make the offering compelling. And, they're up against some pretty great AI labs. And I think some of it is just, hey, it takes time to train up these models. Now, one question is, why is it that NVIDIA and Palantir are partnering? Like, what makes them natural partners? And I want to just explain that. If you want to think about the AI stack for a minute, at the most basic level, there's 3 layers to the stack. It's basically the chips, it's the models, and then it's the applications. Well, right now, we have in the middle layer, at the model layer of the stack, you've got 2 dominant companies. You've got Anthropic and OpenAI. We know that Anthropic's around 60-something billion of ARR. OpenAI is at 40-something billion of ARR. As far as we know, no one else is really generating meaningful revenue at the model layer. So we already have, let's say, an emerging duopoly situation. We have Anthropic pushing for a regulatory capture agenda that would probably enshrine that duopoly situation at a regulatory level, because they're pushing for a safety agenda where Dario explicitly says that these other models are not safe. You shouldn't have access to them. So you've kind of got that situation. You've got the market producing duopoly. You've got the government now potentially leaning not to bust up the duopoly, but maybe to enforce it. So that's sort of the emerging situation at the model layer. And so if you're an application at the top of the stack like Palantir, or you're a chip company at the bottom of the stack, that's the last thing you want. You want a competitive model layer. Why? Because if you're an application, you don't want to be beholden to one model provider, right? You want to have a choice. And if you're an enterprise, you want to have a choice because you don't have to give up all of your proprietary knowledge. And if you're a chip company, you don't want a monopsony buyer situation where there's only 1 or 2 companies who can buy your chips. And by the way, they're producing their own. You want to have as diverse and healthy an ecosystem as possible where there's lots of potential buyers for your chips. And if enterprises are rolling their own using open models, that's kind of an ideal situation because now there's like a long tail of buyers. So I think really the whole ecosystem, in a way, the chip companies, developers, applications, enterprises, everybody has an incentive for a competitive layer of the stack at the model layer.
100%.
And really the only companies who don't are Anthropic and OpenAI, because obviously they want to dominate, they want to be a duopoly. And my view is, look, if you earn a monopoly or duopoly in our system, we don't ban monopolies in the United States. We ban anti-competitive tactics. But if you lawfully achieve monopoly through amazing performance, we don't, nationalize you or make you illegal, and I think that's fine. However, the government, in my view, should do nothing to make monopoly or duopoly more likely. They should make it harder for these companies to engage in monopoly tactics, and they should do everything they can to keep the model layer competitive, because competition is what brings out the best, and it's good for the ecosystem, and it ensures our civil liberties and consumer choice. So,
and it's going to be amazing for pricing, Sachs. If you think about what this competition is about to do, and you've been very vocal about this in your time in Washington, D.C., we want to have a level playing field. We want to see massive competition. I'll give you your flowers and your lei. You did a great job of now setting the table for this in 2026 and 2027 going forward by letting people compete. The cost of tokens, Freeberg, is going to go down 90% a year for the next 3 years. You're going to be able to buy 1,000 times as many tokens that are more intelligent because you're going to have free options. The price will be free or close to free for many of these, and that could be incredibly disruptive. Yes, Dave?
Yeah, and I think people are going to, again, deploy their own hardware against it. I think there's going to be a buying frenzy in the enterprise, not just with the neoclouds and the hyperscalers. I think the enterprise is going to be a buyer. And when that happens, you do the simple math, and you don't want to have a dependency on server availability and cloud downtime, and you don't want to put these models on some third-party cloud, and you want to do stuff that's very cheap. Like a lot of people are running, I mean, you guys do this, you're running day-to-day workflows for your enterprise. And you realize, hey, I could run these workflows on an open source model on a machine in my office, and we don't need to be sending this stuff back to some fancy, scalable
100%.
cloud service provider.
You're right. The industry spent so many years convincing everybody to flip to the cloud, and the realization may be that all this idea of shared infrastructure may not be the best idea in a world of intelligence.
And this is what I mean by like a
May not
distributed
work.
spoke model, because I do think it's not going to be all or none. I think you're going to end up being like 70-20-10 in how you're going to allocate your resources for model inference and running models. You're going to probably be 70% in some big cloud. Maybe you'll do 20% local, 10% you'll try other clouds. You'll kind of mix stuff up, but I don't think you're going to end up doing things the way you've been doing them historically. You'll very quickly realize that it's okay to waste tokens. It's okay to let your employees make stupid apps that last for a couple of weeks but burn through billions of tokens if it's running on your own hardware. Then all you're paying for is the electricity in your office or in your
Well, this is what I've been talking about here for like
and
a year now.
everyone's
Since
realizing
OpenCloud
this
came
because,
out. Yeah.
like I'm totally fine, for my kids to eat sugar if I don't have to deal with them. You know, like go ahead.
I was gonna say, I
noticed
think
that-
OpenClaw released an app on the phone, right? I think I heard it like in a podcast when I was driving here the other day. And I forgot to circle back to that. OpenClaw. Yeah, they did. Curious to play with this and see how it works. Save that for later. Bum, bum, bum.
Like in the last 3 days, we've now seen other people trying to get their own lock-in. Microsoft just announced a $2.5 billion investment to stand up an FDE, or Amazon is spending $1 billion
Forward
to create
deployed
an FDE.
engineers for the people in the
Yeah.
audience. Forward deployed engineers. So they
Anthropic
can-
has one.
Yeah.
OpenAI has one.
Yeah, and when they come knocking, Chamath, they're knocking like, hey, can I send my engineers to study your business and put it into my model? I mean, people are going to be slamming the door on these. It's like getting a Jehovah's Witness at your door. Like, no, I don't want to be part of your cult. I want to own
One
this.
thing-
And that's what I've been saying. Just let me make one quick point, and I'll hand it to you, Friedberg. This is what I've been saying with when I was going on my OpenClaw, which now is like Hermes and some other products. Everybody in your organization is going to have a Mac Studio or a Dell with a massive amount of RAM, and you're going to spend $10,000, $20,000 per employee on local compute so that they can token max to a retard maxing level. Who cares what they do on their local computer? Who cares? Let them rip. And then you're going to give them a laptop that connects to it and it syncs so you can control it. It's literally going to be a server per individual in your company. That's the way to model this in your brain. Everybody has their own language model that they're crafting 100% of the time as they work, and it's all local, so you don't have data leaks. Go ahead, Friedberg, I'll give you the final word.
I mean, I think one of the things that this reveals quite clearly is that there is no
I don't know if that's
buttered, slippery
necessarily
slide.
viable. Like, yeah, okay, for smaller use cases, yeah, but if you're doing like huge amounts of processing and data, I don't know if you can just whip up a Mac Studio and have it all run on there.
to job loss. I think everyone is realizing that, you know,
I was
you're
wondering
not
where
just-
you were going with that, buttering it
Yeah.
up. So is Chamath.
But I think, you know, the idea that everyone had in their head 2 years ago, the narrative that was formed and everyone clutched onto. And by the way, you will not see the media reverse on this narrative. I've realized the importance here when if you're a reporter or you're a journalist and you come up with some story that says something that's happening or is going to happen or has happened or is about the future, you destroy your own credibility if the narrative shifts. You cannot ever let go of the narrative. And I think this is one of the things that we can kind of acknowledge is going on with this job loss narrative problem, is that even as all the data comes out, as all of the reconfiguring of how enterprises are using AI, as it's revealing to all of them that they're actually not just going to cut costs, but they're going to grow revenue, and it's going to be a kind of clunky way of getting there, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's not the slippery slope to job loss, to nihilism. Everyone's going to kind of wake up and be like, wait, this reality that we all thought we were living in is not really the reality that we are living in. We're living in a reality where AI is clunky. It takes some putting together. It's a little more complicated than we thought. It's definitely going to deliver value, but it's not about just turning off all the jobs and letting the genius AI solve all my enterprise problems and scale me into infinity without humans. And I think that that's a big kind of narrative shift. And you will not see the media accept that their narrative is wrong. Because as soon as they have to acknowledge that they were wrong in what they were saying about job loss and all the other senators and people that are proclaiming job loss, job loss, job loss. By the way, the reason they're making that proclamation is so that they can step in and control AI and they can drive their systems of socialism, which is what they're all looking to deploy.
100%.
But if they had to come in and say, look, the data doesn't map to the narrative, their credibility is destroyed. So they'll double down on it, and they'll double down on it. And I'm telling everyone that's listening, look at the data. There is no job loss with AI. It is an absolute scam to tell the world that AI is taking away jobs and destroying jobs. And the
I
world
don't know if this is a great argument to be making, to be honest. It's like, sure, does the data support that at this point in time? Let's just say yes for the sake of argument. Like that has no bearing on the future, right? I think anyone that's like understands how technology is developing knows that like a lot of jobs are gonna get cut because of this. It's a waste of money, right? Your overhead costs of paying people's salaries. It's just there's some scenarios where it's literally just needless.
is shifting. It is clunky. It is valuable. It is going to take some time. And it is going to create far more jobs than it is destroying.
We're a
Totally
bunch of
agree.
monkeys. We've been given this new tool. We're going to solve more problems with the new tool. There will be job displacement.
We don't know,
and the
right? We don't
problem
know.
is
Who
people
knows
do
how
not
things play
understand
out.
the nuance between these two terms. Certain jobs will be retired, and they're going to be retired at a faster rate than you can imagine. But other jobs will happen. And you pointed this out, Chamath. Hey, it's the most, I don't know if you did it here or on your personal channel on YouTube, but you know, it's the most empowering tool ever. If you
Jason,
get
which
raw
jobs are
code
getting
in-
replaced? I'm
I
just
said
going to challenge your narrative.
displaced. Very simple.
Yeah,
very simple.
displaced. But you're saying
Absolutely.
some of them are going to go away faster than you can see. What are those
Absolutely.
jobs that are going to go away
Yeah,
faster
I've
than you
said
can see?
it
Because I'm still not seeing the categories. Yeah.
Totally. Customer support jobs. Those are going to
Where?
go away very quickly.
Where?
Uh,
Where? You're just making shit up because it's not
No,
actually
no,
happening.
I see it in enterprises all the time.
Where,
You can talk to
where do
AC.
you see it? Show me the customer support enterprise shutdown that's happening. Just show it to me. Is
will.
it in the room with us right now? Like, where is it?
I will literally.
No, the thing
I'll
is,
do
like,
that.
I don't know. Anecdotally, I know of multiple people that I've been talking to lately that work in tech, and all their companies have been cutting people. Yeah.
That research, and I'll give it to you.
I'll give you some research. Hold on.
No, no.
Can I provide some research?
Hold
We had
on,
this
hold
debate
on.
before.
He asked me a question. Just let me finish my answer, and then you can take it. You asked me the question. Customer service jobs are going to go away because consumers prefer to talk to the AI, and it's perfect at that. Entry-level jobs around data entry, around business process outsourcing, those are going to go away. So will driving cabs and those kind of jobs. Those ones are obvious low-hanging fruit, just like we had the typing pool and messengers and other products go away when we had word processors on every desk. Those jobs will be displaced 100%, and those jobs will be in the
we're on
millions.
year 20 of cab drivers going away, dude. Like when Uber came out, everyone said all the driving jobs were going to go away. It's all over.
Well, no,
It's just
no,
not happening.
Waymo is stuck at 3,000. Tesla's stuck at like 30 cars, but that's all going to change in the very near future.
Right. Everything you're saying is perspective. This is my point. You are still being perspective in the future with everything you're saying, and every point that we turn, every time we turn a page, it's like, wait, this
do you
isn't
not
happening.
believe that self-driving is real? Is that your premise? Is that self-driving is not going to get rid of cab drivers? Is that your
I
premise?
think it's real, but
okay.
yeah, I think it's real for sure.
Do you think it will get rid of cab drivers? You're arguing as if like I'm wrong here, but I think
I
you
get in the
agree with
car
me that
every
they're
day.
going away.
I get in the car every day, and my car drives me. And I get on my phone and I do work.
Okay, but do you think cabs in cities are not going to be self-driving? Do you think Zipline's not going to deliver
You're doing the
your
Mont
food?
Bailey thing again, J. Cal.
It's not Mont Bailey. I see this from my investments. I have a company, AutoLane, that is doing this right now.
But just go to customer support again, because you've been saying, yeah.
I literally have had this debate verbatim, and
well, displacement, not job loss, is my only point.
Yeah. What Friedberg is pointing out is that whenever anyone pushes back on the fact that you don't have any data to support this in the present, you say you're talking about the future. Okay, fine. It's a prediction. You know, there's no data to support it in the present. That's fine. You're saying it's going to happen in the future.
No, I'll give you the data point.
Oh,
you
you
can
will?
dismiss what I will. Yes, if you talk to Uber and Waymo, in the cities where Waymo is present and has gotten past a couple hundred cars, they've stopped recruiting drivers. Drivers are either static or going down in those markets. So that is absolute evidence that this is happening, and the rollout is going to be fast and furious. So it is not a future prediction. You can talk to the CEO of Waymo, you can talk to the CEO of Lyft and Uber, and they will tell you this explicitly.
cold marketing.
We interviewed Dara, and he said jobs were increasing at Uber.
Yeah, because they're delivering more. Like those, because productivity's going up with delivery. Productivity goes up, so these people drive more.
Yeah, like this. I think they're like, I don't know. Either they're not particularly informed on the specific topic in terms of the Uber stuff, or just like being disingenuous. Because like, if you've watched any interviews with the Uber CEO, like they're planning to build out that app to some like very crazy shit actually. Like everything from like your hotels to your groceries to like rentals, and they're bringing in all these companies to partner with them, so that like they can offer lower fees to the users. And like stuff like the Uber One plan is like crazy growth right now. So like, yeah, they're hiring a bunch of people to build out that side of the Uber platform. But he's talking about the drivers, and they're kind of just like ignoring that.
100% lying. You're being disingenuous.
The last time we interviewed Dara on stage, he said jobs were going up.
In markets where Waymo is, there might be other markets where things are growing because they don't allow self-driving or they haven't gotten there yet. In markets where Waymo has hit critical mass, the number of human drivers is going down. This is just a fact. And they're literally stop recruiting.
In some narrow, arbitrarily defined subset of their jobs, you're pointing to flatness. Meanwhile, Dara told us that hiring across the company has gone up in the face
at the
of
company,
these
not
trends.
The drivers. No, you're wrong.
Well,
okay, anyway, we'll agree to disagree here.
Let me give you some actual data. Can I provide us this study? So Ramp and Revelio Labs just released a new study in the past week.
Yeah, that was great.
And it was an actual study of over 21,000 firms in the US, and they looked at their payroll data combined with their spending on AI. And what they saw is that firms that spent the most on AI actually grew the fastest. And they tended to grow their headcount roughly 10% in the 2 years following the adoption of AI. And entry-level headcount rose even faster. It grew at 12%. So all this stuff about how entry-level headcount's going to get wiped out, not true. The more firms adopted AI, the more hiring they did. At least that was a correlation. Obviously, they can't prove causation, but that was the correlation. And then companies that were not high-intensity adopters of AI, they were either didn't adopt or they were low-intensity adopters, they just saw flatness in their headcount. So no one is really showing a trend here of job loss. What they're showing is that the more you adopt AI, those companies also tend to grow headcount. So there's just no data to support this idea that in the present, AI is causing job loss.
Job displacement will happen. Jobs will increase because of AI. Sovereignty will increase, and people will make more money. Corporations will have more earnings. But there will be jobs being retired. And I think if you look at translators, if you look at telephone operators, if you look at bill collectors, if you look at Waymo drivers, these very simple tasks are being automated. How do I know that? Because I invest in startups that are raising hundreds of millions of dollars to replace these jobs with AI. We had the pilot. We had people building the perfect pilot, the perfect driver, the perfect customer support rep. That is the point of AI. Every single sales pitch of these AI companies is to retire these jobs that are not great jobs. There is no way in God's green earth that humans will be at Amazon sorting packages. It's not going to happen. All those factory jobs are being replaced. Elon is explicitly building Optimus for this purpose. And when I say it's future, I have always contended it's future. Sachs, you cannot use your silly debate techniques to say that I'm using some crazy thing. It is happening as we speak. We're soaking in it. This is the transition period.
What I'll tell you is that in every environment in which 8090 operates, every customer, I don't think we've seen layoffs. Not a single one.
Yeah, and in this Ramp card study, they said, quote, gains emerge gradually and are broad across roles, including engineering, sales, administration, and customer service. So they're not seeing like one category of jobs getting wiped out. By the way, it could happen in the future. I mean, none of us can say for sure what's going to happen in the future. But if you're looking for data in the present, we're not seeing it yet.
I think there's going to be a strong human alpha. You know, like when vending machines came along, it's not like bartenders went away. Like I like going to a bar, talking to the bartender, and they make a great drink. And those bartenders make better money today than they did 20 years ago. I don't, and maybe the vending machine replacement model isn't the right one in that case. But I think that there's a lot of value in human interaction that's going to get a premium in the future. Because as more stuff gets automated, I want to have an actual driver when I go to Las Vegas. I don't want to go in a Waymo. I want to have a great driver in a nice car that takes me to the dinners, drives me around. New York City, same thing. I don't want to go in a Waymo per se.
I
want
don't
to have,
know about that,
people that can do.
I do not know about that. It's a pretty terrible argument to be making. Like, first of all, like, let's just look at the customer service example, right? If you're talking to somebody over the phone and you literally cannot tell it's AI or not, do you care about the human factor? No. Secondly, there are tons of people who would prefer to do the opposite of what he's describing, than not have a driver, to have full privacy with you and whoever you're with.
Do things that could otherwise be automated, and I'll pay a huge premium. I could sit in a friggin' massage chair. Why do I go pay someone $200 for an hour massage? You know, I think there's an aspect to the alpha of you. We could cut that one, but I do think there's a premium to humans, and I don't think that. And I
There's a
actually think
premium to humans.
No, the counter narrative.
This
J-Cal, this is really important. I think that the counter narrative to automation generally is that we're going to realize the importance of human interaction and humans in the loop, and we're going to pay a premium for it.
Well, do you remember like a
That's
year
why
ago?
I don't believe in AGI and the singularity happening next year. I'm just not there.
Do you remember like a year ago when Klarna said they're going to replace their whole customer service department with AI, and they
Yeah,
did
they
such a
went
lot-
Totally.
they did a lot of hype. It was peak aura farming, and
Totally.
well, lo and behold, they flipped the decision back after a year. They said that from a brand perspective, a company perspective, it's just so critical that you are clear to your customer that there will always be a human if you want it.
Human in the loop will be the premium, and we will all realize in the next year and a half the importance of human in the loop, even in the context of AI and automation working. Human in the
There's
loop
so
is going to be
many
more valuable, and then
CEOs.
you're going to pay a premium for human in the loop.
There's so many CEOs who want to tap into the media's hype cycle. This is the thing, is that whenever the media gets a hold of one of these narratives, there's so many CEOs who are not like Karp, right? Who just are not original, and they don't really have anything important to say. So the only way for them to get publicity is to glom onto that press cycle and try to use it. And then they'll chime in with, you know, how they're going to do crazy things like eliminate their whole customer support department. And then lo and behold, it turns out just to be totally fake.
I think the ramp data is directionally accurate. In our experience, I would say the same thing. I think people that use AI tend to grow faster. They tend to hire more. They tend to make more money.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, by the way, I actually agree with
I'm in
J-Cal.
100% agreement on that.
From a career standpoint, I would not want to be a level 1 customer support rep, because I do think that like if all you're doing is like answering forgotten password requests, that's not a great place to be. However, those jobs were basically outsourced to the Philippines and places like that a long time ago. I mean, most enterprises are not doing kind of that level 0, level 1 customer support in the US. They do have customer support centers, but they're doing
You know what I was gonna say? Actually, I'm very curious. Now that he mentions this, because I've been seeing some stories coming out of these like emerging regions where like these jobs were being outsourced to, that they're no longer getting the outsourced jobs there. So I'm curious what the labor data looks like in those regions. Because it can be because like that's like quite a detrimental impact, right? Because like sure, we were outsourcing those jobs to like not pay as much here, because we would, or I should say, like we would be paying more for the equivalent job here. But like a lot of times, those salaries were still quite high relative to what that region offered for other jobs. So like if they're being cut off from that like American and like tech companies and whatnot, or like any company really, that's gonna be quite harmful. Because how are you gonna replace that kind of salary? That if the most companies where you live don't offer anything near that.
doing like level 2, level 3. They're doing the escalations, the higher value stuff. That's going to be a lot harder to replace with AI.
Totally.
I do kind of worry about, well, what happens in some of these other countries that are doing the super entry level stuff, because
That's right.
I think that is
So
ripe
they'll
to be
have massive
replaced.
job loss. But
Well, I
the
don't know if it'll be
premise in
massive,
the
but
US,
that's where the risk is. I mean,
Yeah,
frankly, it's not in
listen,
the US.
this is so that maybe
And
we're
yeah,
getting to
you know,
something.
interesting. What's the other thing? Well, I was watching somebody talk about this the other day, like the whole concept of like UBI and whatnot. But a lot of interesting intricacies comes up with that whole debate when you start to consider like you have to do on a global scale. Yeah.
Consensus here. Job displacement versus job loss. Here is Brett Adcock sharing what they're doing.
Was
at
it just
Figure.
a figure
They
stream
had
or something?
an 8-hour challenge to have this robot they're building sort packages, and they did it for 200 hours. That's today. This is the least good it will ever be. This is the worst it's going to ever be. These things are getting really good. I spent time with Elon. I've looked at Optimus. I can tell you Optimus is better than what Figure's doing. What Optimus is going to do when Bezos and Andy Jassy unleash Optimus inside of the Amazon factories is it's going to get rid of let me state this very clearly, every single package sorting, every single package delivery will not be done by humans in 10 years. And it's starting today. Just like the idea that you would put together some of this consumer electronic stuff in factories with humans has gone away over time. And other countries, I think you're making a very good point here, Sachs, are going to experience it first. In America, knowledge workers, the entrepreneurial spirit, I think we're going to see a Cambrian explosion in startups, which means we're going to be the ones who benefit from it. But if you're looking at those other countries, they'll see it acutely first. We're just going to see it here with drivers, and that's 5-10 million people, like we saw it with cashiers. The idea of going to a cashier at a fast food restaurant, which I know you guys don't go to all that often, or a Starbucks, the idea that you would interact with a cashier has been going away slowly because it's just consumers don't even want it. We'll agree to disagree here to a certain extent. Maybe we made
Look,
some progress.
I went to McDonald's recently, and I ordered from one of those monitors. Zero
What did you order?
robots
You
involved.
filet a fish guy? I'm a filet of fish guy.
No,
What'd you
I
get? What's your
ordered
I'm a Big Mac. I like a Big Mac.
You like a Big Mac? What about you, Sachs? What's your order? What's your? Did you get a McFlurry?
They
Did
had,
you
a
get an
thing,
apple
they had
pie?
a thing called a homegrown burger, which was some new, I think it was kind of like more like an In-N-Out type burger
A Shake
situation they were
Shack
testing.
smash patty? Oh.
Yeah, it was good.
Any good?
Anyway, my point is just the automation, obviously, they didn't have a cashier there already, but there's zero robots involved. Similarly, there's already a lot of automation going on in those Amazon warehouses. I don't know if you've ever been to like a FedEx packaging or routing depot. It's all conveyor belts and, you know.
Yeah,
it's
robots pushing it and
Like, yeah,
directing
but
it.
it's not humanoid robots. There's already tons and tons of automation
Sure.
at these places.
But this last mile part is the one I think that is going to shock people. When you have an Optimus walking the Tesla self-driving car, and then they walk into your porch, ring your doorbell, and knock on your door and put it on your front step porch, that's where this is going to get super interesting.
I think it's going to lead to a boom because think about like just something like building a house, okay?
Oh,
You know how long it takes to build a house? It takes
In California,
years.
3 years, yeah.
Yeah, years,
Texas,
like
9
multiple
months.
years.
In
Now,
China, one day.
There you go.
but imagine if you have like a construction crew and I don't know, it's like 20 humans and 50 robots or something. The humans have to tell the robots what to do. I
Yeah, the
think
supervisors.
I think it's going to take a long, long time for the robots to be able to do that super high skill work, but they can be given tasks and then
carry the
granted,
lumber.
they can do. So
Yeah.
maybe it only takes a year to build a house instead of 2 or 3, and that's the solution to our housing crisis.
100%. All right, listen. In a related story, by Commandant Howard Lutnick's decree, subject Dario Amodei will be permitted to bring his powerful new model, Fable 5, to market for the glory of the realm and at the pleasure of His Majesty Lord Trump. Remember 2 weeks ago, the U.S. government put export restrictions on Fable and Mythos and the Iliad and the Odyssey and whatever else they're doing over there at Anthropic. And Anthropic expanded Mythos to 50 unauthorized entities, according to sources. That included SK Telecom, which allegedly perhaps maybe has ties to China. On June 30th, Howie in the
Shout out
Commerce
to
Department, that's my guy, Howard
SKP.
Lutnick, my favorite in the administration, with respect to you, Sachs. He lifted controls on Fable 5. Mythos 5 was restored to U.S. customers this past week, June 26th. Many suspected this would happen because Anthropic replaced Dario as their lead negotiator. Here's the palace intrigue I was referencing earlier. Co-founder Tom Brown, whoever that is, took the spot and appears to be getting along better with the Trump organization. For example, he proactively genuflected showed the tweet to Lutnick's tweet announcing the export restrictions had been lifted. Tom Brown, thanks for your partnership on this, Secretary! Exclamation point. Look at that smile. Tom Brown coming in to save the day. In a post-mortem blog post, Anthropic said the jailbreak that triggered the shutdown was not unique to Claude. Remember, Andy Jassy reported to the Commerce Department what was going on with this. Okay, Sachs, former AI czar, what's going on? Give us the palace intrigue, please.
Well, look, the export control letter was taken down after 2 weeks. I think that this was a highly unusual circumstance, and it was brought about by 3 things, 3 conditions, and you really needed all 3 in order for this to happen. Number 1, you had Dario running around for months saying that he had created a cyber weapon. He almost boasted about it. It was Mythos. Okay, so that was number 1. Number 2 is you have a trusted partner of Anthropic, which is Amazon, which did its testing of Fable, which was Mythos with guardrails, and they reported that the guardrails failed. So therefore, Fable was, according to Dario, a cyber weapon. So that was important fact number 2. And then fact number 3 is that when confronted with this information, Dario basically refused to roll back Fable until the jailbreak could be fixed, or at least that's what he communicated to the administration, and that's what the administration heard. So I think if you change any one of those 3 facts, this would have ended up not causing the government to basically send that letter to Anthropic. I think if Dario hadn't primed officials to see Mythos as a cyber weapon, it wouldn't have happened. If their trusted partner Amazon hadn't reported the jailbreak, wouldn't have happened. And if Dario hadn't refused to take action when he did, then this wouldn't have happened. I think this was sort of a unique circumstance. I guess what I'm trying to say is that a lot of people are reading a lot into this letter. I know that foreign companies or foreign actors or allies and partners of the U.S. are wondering, does this mean that our ability to access U.S. technology is going to be limited? I don't think it does. I think that the administration reacted with the tools at its disposal. And I think that what the president cares about is what he's always said, which is he wants to be pro-innovation, he wants to be pro-export, he wants to be pro-infrastructure, he wants to support American companies in the AI race. And I don't think people should over-extrapolate based on what just happened over the past few weeks. I think
Let
it
me
was
ask you,
highly particular to this fact pattern.
A lot of discussion of exports. Let's talk about imports for a reason. It seems to me that importing Chinese models, when we in fact have open source models here from NVIDIA and other players, why have you not, or during your time, did you not advise or talk about here blocking access to import? We will not allow the importation of Huawei products into the United States or self-driving technology from China. Why are we allowing open source models? Why didn't we put it out an edict? And why didn't you suggest that when you were the czar of AI? Why didn't we stop Kimi and DeepSeek from coming into this country in order to drive our open source technology and to keep the leakage from those model stacks?
I mean,
Well,
how,
if you
how
just
would you
have
even
concern,
do
of
that?
Well, number one is that once a model is open source, it stops being Chinese in a way, right? Because you can now take that model, you can fork it, you can create your own version, you run it in an American data center on your own hardware. There's no packets going back to China. There's no data leakage going back to China. In some sense, they've made a contribution to the open source community, and then people can take it from there. Now, should you still exercise caution? Absolutely, because you have to make sure that the model is safe. It doesn't contain backdoors. I mean, this is a relatively new surface area for cybersecurity. So look, you should obviously be cautious. But the bottom line is that when an American company takes an open source model and converts it and runs it itself, it is now theirs.
But it builds consensus around that model and makes that model stronger by more people participating in it, which was your argument for allowing people to get on the hardware stack.
Well, but then I think that leads me to argument number two, which is if you were to do something like ban open source in the United States, you'll put the United States on an island. The rest of the world is not going to follow suit. The rest of the world wants to use open models because of the advantages they offer. They're cheaper, they're more customizable, they offer more control. And again, they stop being Chinese models once you can take them and adapt them and run them on your own hardware. So the rest of the world's not going to stop using these models just because we do. And what we will do then is subject American enterprises to a token tax. You're going to end up paying for closed models in the US.
No, but there's
charge
NVIDIA.
more.
We have open source models now. NVIDIA has theirs, for example. There are other ones. So if there are open source models here that are equally competitive, would you then support an import control so that more people in America put their effort into American open source models?
Well, one of the things I've been saying for
and Google's open source models, obviously.
One of the things I've been saying for over a year is that we need more strong offerings in open source from the United States. So I hope we win the open category of models, just like I do the closed. I mean, I hope America wins the AI race in both open and closed models. I don't really want anyone being forced to use models they don't want. But look, if American models, open models, are better than Chinese open models, they will win, and people will want to adopt them. So if what you're saying is true, that our open models are better or getting better or going to surpass the Chinese ones, leave that to the market to decide. And just one last point on this is, I'm not against limiting the import of certain Chinese products in the US. For example, I don't think we allow Chinese connected cars.
We don't.
I think we should think twice about whether we allow, Chinese robots into the US. I mean,
we block
wouldn't
drones.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to have like a fifth column of of backdoor Chinese robots or something in the US, potentially. I'm just brainstorming here, okay? So I'm not against limiting certain things, but we should understand that when we do that, we are inviting retaliation by them as well. And we are in a trade relationship with them. We still need things from them. We still need rare earths, things like that. One day we won't. Hopefully, I do think we should try to be as independent and autonomous as possible. But while we do, we have to think very carefully about the larger trade relationship.
Yeah, Trump banned the import of Chinese drones, the signature part of the legislation. So. All right, so a little housekeeping here. All In Summit is coming back September 13th, 14th, and 15th. Fifth year of the summit. Keep raising the bar. Man, if you knew the speakers that I knew, that Freeberg's lined up, your brain would explode. This year, the nights are as good as the days because, let's face it, Freeberg likes to party. He's been known to have a cocktail or two. We're doing the biggest poker tournament we've ever done at the summit this year. Gaming will happen at the welcome party. And we're going to have a full casino night at an exclusive mansion in LA. Ooh la la. Applications open now. Allin.com. Don't miss our biggest event of the year. I think we have 12 trillion in market cap booked so far. Probably going to double. Okay, next topic. Topic number 3. It's a hot SCOTUS summer. The justices released 11 decisions in the final few days of the term. Let's discuss the top 3 right now. Birthright, citizenship. Case was Trump versus Barbara. On the first day of his second term, Trump, as you know, signed an EO ending automatic citizenship for children born to illegal immigrants or those on temporary visas. This is codified, I guess, in the 14th Amendment. Court struck it down 6-3, maybe 5-4. There's some nuance here. 255,000 children are born every year to non-citizen parents. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority, joined by all 3 liberal members. The court is still a bit polarized. Citizenship, then and now, was the right to have rights. We keep that promise today, according to Chief Justice's majority. Kavanaugh carved out a lane for Congress to tighten up on birthright citizenship. That's still consistent with the 14th Amendment. As you know, the administration has been pointing out, and you watch Fox News, you've heard this a million times. If you watch CNN and not All In, you're going to maybe have heard of this once or twice. Birth tourism. A Chinese national, Dongwan Li, pled guilty in 2019 to a scheme to help pregnant Chinese women enter the U.S. under false pretenses so their babies would be granted U.S. citizenship. She pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit immigration fraud and 1 count of visa fraud. So we handled that through the legal system. She served 10 months in prison. Trump's response to the loss, quote, Congress should start today to work on ending birthright citizenship. They will have my complete and total support for Trump. Feels like a loss for Trump, objectively, but he's going to keep fighting this one. Close decision. If you ask Stephen Miller, he doesn't like immigrants like you 3 dudes, but I would let all 3 of you in again.
That's not his position.
Okay, well, you can explain it. I know he doesn't like
we're
immigrants.
Legal immigrants. We're legal immigrants.
Yes. Well, but
you understand the difference, right?
Well, birthright would also be illegal according to the Constitution.
Yeah, but that's the whole point, is it doesn't really make sense that, let's say, an illegal immigrant runs across the border, is like 9 months pregnant, plops out a baby, and all of a sudden they're an American citizen? How does that make sense?
What about somebody who's been here for 20 years, Sachs, worked really hard, they're illegal, and they have a baby? Should the baby kicked out and that baby not be a citizen? Let's say it's somebody's nanny, somebody's gardener. We have 20 million, 30 million illegal immigrants we've let into this country. We waved them in across many different Republican and Democratic terms over the last 30 years. What do you say to that person who has a baby? Should they be deported? Should they be given citizenship?
Well, look, the question here is what the Constitution says. And my view is that the original purpose and understanding of the 14th Amendment was to make sure that the children of freed slaves would have citizenship rights. That was the purpose of it. That was obvious. And I don't think it speaks to the situations you're talking about, and Congress should just make the law about those situations. But now Congress cannot make the law because the Supreme Court has ruled that citizenship is determined by birthright. So in that case,
well, my question was somebody who's been here 20 years as an illegal immigrant,
yeah,
who's waved in under Reagan.
No, the thing is, like, I don't know. I'm not particularly well informed enough on this topic to know like what people are really debating about this, but like the idea of someone like coming into the US 9 months pregnant and having the baby there, like how common can that possibly be? I can't imagine it's that common. Maybe it is. I don't know.
I'm asking you your personal opinion. Should they
I don't
get
know. I
citizenship?
mean, look, you're talking about an edge case. It's complicated, but the point is that we all know why the 14th Amendment was ratified. It was to protect freed slaves, obviously. And now we're in territory that's like very different, but the Supreme Court has decided that if you're born here for any reason whatsoever, even if you're an illegal, even if you weren't supposed to be in the country, now your children are American citizens. By the way, I don't think any country in the world has this policy. It's kind of a crazy policy. So I agree with Stephen Miller about
I'm not
this.
sure it's
But
an edge case.
anyway,
I think the majority case is people who've been here illegally for decades. And I think the edge
Then
case,
Congress could
the one
decide
you
that.
proposed is the edge case, like a pregnant woman running across the border.
let Congress decide that. I don't
Okay.
think the Constitution ever spoke to
What's your
this.
personal opinion on this, Chamath? Should the person who's been here for 10, 20 years, paid their taxes, but they're illegal and they have a child, should that child be a citizen or not? What's Chamath's personal opinion here?
I haven't thought about this.
Great. Okay. It's I mean, that's the key to the I think what we're talking about here.
No,
Freeberg, do you have a-
no. Because Jacob, there's a big difference between making something constitutional and then doing it via a law of Congress. And what
Right.
the Supreme Court has said here is that Congress does not get to make the decision. The majority of the American people don't get to make the decision. The Constitution requires a certain point of view, and there's no way to change that without a constitutional amendment, which will never happen. So we're kind of now stuck with this position.
Well,
If you read the language, and someone posted this was the debate that when the 14th Amendment was being debated, Senator Jacob Howard, I'll give credit to Geiger Capital for pointing this out. There's a transcript of the debate that took place, and it says, every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue of natural law and national law a citizen of the United States. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of persons. Because if you go to the history, in 1868, there was this Dred Scott decision, which denied citizenship to the children of slaves. And the intention at the time was to ensure citizenship for newly freed slaves and their descendants. That was the original intention of the 14th Amendment at the time. So this goes back to the great debate that happens at the Supreme Court all the time, which is the textual or the intentional reading of the Constitution or its amendments. The textual reading is you look strictly at the words, the plain literal meaning of those words. And then the intentional reading is what was intended at the time by the framers of the Constitution or the amendment that may be the subject of the debate. And so I think that's ultimately what this comes down to. If you think about the intention at the time, it was really built around free slaves. There wasn't a consideration at that time of having this massive movement of immigration that was taking place or that has taken place since. That wasn't even in the kind of realm of consciousness or consideration when this amendment was being passed. So the intentionalism kind of argument would be, hey, wait a second, this wasn't really what they intended, but the textual representation is what it is. And that's what the ruling kind of led to in this particular case. My personal opinion, if you're asking it,
yes, I'm trying to get personal opinions here. Yeah.
I do think birthright citizenship should be endowed to the children of legal residents of the United States, whether they're a citizen or not. So yeah, I think that's critical. So if you're a visitor, if you get on an airplane and fly here for a weekend on a vacation and you have a visa or you have, temporary visitor status to come
Or
to
you're
come
an
and visit,
ambassador.
yeah, or you have a temporary visitor status to come to the United States to visit, you are not a resident of the United States. So your children should not become citizens of the United States unless you're a resident. And remember, we don't just have like citizens and non-citizens. We also have resident status in this country. And a resident status is a green card. I mean, for years, I was on a green card. 3 of us were immigrants. We all went through this process. Once you get resident status, you're now a permanent resident of the United States. You haven't been given citizenship rights yet. But if you have a child, I think it's reasonable for your child to have citizenship rights if you're a legal resident rather than a legal visitor or illegal visitor to the United States. So that would be my personal assessment. It would be great for that to be the law, but obviously this is now kind of, gone
I think you explained that really well. I didn't even know all of this. I'm on your side. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with
Makes
what
sense.
you're saying. In addition, people shouldn't be able to do the tourism thing. We should handle that. I do think we should have an exception here for people who have been non-criminals who are here illegally, because we, as America, Republicans especially, during the time when they were pro-free trade, NAFTA, and really waved in a large percentage of the immigrants who are here, obviously Biden did that as well, I think we have a moral obligation to those people since we waved them in, and we waved them in to work at our businesses because we wanted to pay under minimum wage to them. Those people suffered here in our country to take those jobs, to make us richer, to make our country richer. We have a moral and ethical obligation to them and to their children. We should give them a path to citizenship unless they're criminals, and their children should be
Fair enough.
Americans. Since they came here to live the American dream, whether it was illegal or not, we waved them in. That was our mistake. And now that we've closed the border, we should make amends to those 20 million people. That's my personal opinion.
Right.
I don't think we
But
have.
what
You
you're doing
need
right
more
now.
time to think about it. And Sachs, what's your thought?
Well, my point is we're all just making arguments about what the law should be, and these are the kinds of arguments that Congress should be making and deliberating over.
Yeah.
And these are the edge cases. These are the nuances that should be handled in a citizenship law. And what the Supreme Court has done here is remove that space for Congress to legislate. And I think Congress needs that space because there are these edge cases, and instead it's interpreted the 14th Amendment in a way that I don't think is consistent with why it was ratified in the first place. And Freeberg is totally right about Dred Scott, which was one of the most awful, probably the most awful Supreme Court ruling of all time. It came out in 1857. And it ruled that black people, whether enslaved or free, were not U.S. citizens, and therefore they had no right to sue in federal courts. And the Chief Justice, Roger Taney, wrote the decision. I mean, he was extremely racist. He wrote that black people had, quote, no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And that decision, furthermore, ruled that Congress could not ban slavery in the new Western territories, which meant that it struck down the Missouri Compromise, which was the law that had kept the peace between the free and slave states for decades. And that is one of the direct things that then triggered the Civil War 3 years later. So it was this historically bad decision that I guess then the 14th Amendment tried to correct by saying that no, freed slaves and their children would be
Totally
American
different
citizens.
context than someone visiting from China for the weekend and having a baby.
Yeah, which we obviously, that one is an easy one to adjudicate. Chamath, I'm curious, feels like as a society, we have now,
We're gonna
because
yap
of the
about
closure of
this
the
for
border,
another
give Trump a lot of
fucking 10
credit for
minutes,
that. It was easily done, which means it could have been done at any time by Biden, and that created a big rift in our society that we're still working through. The other rift that was created over the past year, we've had many debates here about ICE and what some people, including myself, believe was a brutal way to deport people and a cruel way to deport people. Some people might disagree with my opinion. But it seems like Trump stood down on that and calmed it down, I think, because it was so unpopular, just according to the metrics that we saw from Pew and other studies. What do you think the path forward is now? The ICE aggressiveness has stopped. The border has been shut. We seem to be in a sort of holding pattern here, which I think was very wise by Trump to do that. Calm the situation down. I would have liked to see him calm it down a little earlier. What do you think the go forward should be? If we go look at 27, 28, 29, do you think, obviously we all want legal immigration, but what do you think we should be aspiring to do as a country now that the issue has seemingly is not boiling over? What are your thoughts, Shema? Have you given it any thought?
I think that Western countries are losing their cultural representation that makes them unique. And I think that that's very bad. When my parents went to Canada and then stayed, I think part of what they were doing, whether they knew it or not, was making an explicit decision to be Canadian first, who happened to be of Sri Lankan origin. When I came to the United States, I was making an explicit decision to become an American. And then my Canadian and then my Sri Lankan ancestry was second and third, respectively. I think if you cede your immigration, you're ceding your culture. And I think that people have a responsibility to keep the values of what made that country unique in the first place. And you don't need to look too far, because you can look across the pond and you can look at the UK and you can look at Germany and you can look at France. And you have to ask yourself, is the cultural deviation from where they were, has it been better or worse for those countries? And I think in general, it has been worse. So I think people should want to come here to be a part of the American ideal, the American culture. And so I think you have to have a rational immigration policy that has compassion, but ultimately favors this idea that you can't come here to build your own version of your previous country here.
So assimilation is part and parcel of a functioning immigration system. I strongly agree. Freeberg, how should we go forward as Americans? We know Europe has had an issue with, or the populace is there, I think, are in agreement that they may have gone too far in terms of unmitigated massive amounts of immigration, specifically amongst groups that maybe are explicitly not wanting to assimilate. What's your thoughts on what America should do going forward? Do you believe we should be...
It's a great question. I think there's an easy answer. Going back to my makers versus takers point, if the primary motivation for an individual to come to this country is to be given benefits, to be given payments, to be given social services, to be given support, I think that that person should be denied immigration. If the primary motivation for the individual to come to the United States is to work to progress themselves, to become a maker, to create things, to work in such a way that they can generate income, save capital, buy things, advance their family's position, because they are denied those rights due to the tyranny of the place that they're coming from, then they should be granted immigration status to come to this country and contribute. Because at the end of the day, what people may not like to hear, which is the truth, is that every single one of those people is actually net positive in growing our economy. And everyone thinks it's a zero-sum game with respect to jobs in the United States, and we shouldn't let people into this country that create jobs. But the fundamental truth is that anyone that is productive, meaning they create more value than they take in, grows the economy and more jobs get created. And overall, we all benefit from having those individuals here in this country.
Well, I would
so
say
I'm all about discerning immigration, not on the lines of some cultural definition, but really around that simple framing of, are you going to get social support services or are you going to work? And if you're
Are
going
you
to
a train or a gain? Very simple.
by the way,
elegantly
if you are going to work, you are going to culturally assimilate, because that is what the United States is based on, which is productivity, work hard, create things, and have individual agency, have the ability to progress yourself in this world, in this society. And if you take advantage of that opportunity, you're going to love the American ideals that this country was founded upon.
And there are ways to do that, Freeberg. You can look at people's desire to learn the language and understand the political system and culture here. If you said at the border, speaking fluent English, understanding our systems here, and doing some learning before you come here, that would give you more points in a point-based system. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, most of the great functioning democracies in the world have point-based systems. And part of that point-based system could be you're provisional here, and you get a visa for a certain amount of time, provided you don't commit crimes, you don't tap the welfare system and entitlement system, and you do create jobs. We'll take an unlimited number of Elon Musk, David Freeberg, David Saxes, and Chamath Palihapitias in my America as a 7th, 8th generation American. And speaking for the people who've been here the longest, we'll take an unlimited number of the besties I just mentioned, and we should recruit them actively. We should be trying to increase the population of the United States with those people. Every single person, Sachs, we take that's a high performer like yourself from another country like South Africa, Sri Lanka, or pick the country. Every time we recruit one of those people, that gives us a gain. It also, in a super hyper-competitive world, is a loss for China, for Iran, for wherever we can recruit the best and brightest who want to assimilate. Sachs, I'll let you have the final input here. When you are J.D. Vance's chief of staff in 3 years, what will your advice to J.D. be, and how will you frame this during the election cycle? How will you win my vote as a moderate? Chief of staff, David Sachs.
No, that's not going to happen. But
it's 100% going to happen. I talked to Jim.
Well, I can give you the actual polling data. So first of all, I think it's broadly popular in America to seal the border and not allow illegal immigration. Jake, you're even on board with that, obviously. Now, the only people who really aren't are these DSA types who want open borders, they want to abolish ICE, they want mass amnesty. They are lunatics. Now,
Communist lunatics.
if you look at deportations,
who is
about
again?
a third
Who
of
wants
U.S. adults
that? I
say
don't get
all
it.
immigrants in the U.S. who are here illegally should be deported, and then half say some should be. So 32% are in favor of deporting all illegals, and 51% are in favor of deporting some. And almost everybody in that group says that anyone who's committed a violent crime should be deported. And then 16%, which is the DSA group, says none should be deported. So deportations are popular, provided that the illegals have committed violent crimes and have done other things that people think should be unacceptable. But you're right, only 32% believe that every single one should be deported. That's from Pew. Now, I guess I agree with Freeberg's point about the incentives. I mean, if you're coming here to get on welfare programs, forget about it. I mean, we should only allow people in if they're here to work and be successful and are not a net, like, what'd you say, a gain, not a drain? I agree with that. And even in the days of Ellis Island,
You can have it.
where the U.S. was very accepting of immigrants, 1/3 of immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island actually returned home. 2% were not allowed entry due to health or criminal problems, but a third actually went back. And that was because there was no social welfare. And if you didn't make it in the United States, you would leave. And now anyone can walk across the border. They download an app and they get $5,000 a month in welfare. And during the Biden administration, they were getting luxury hotel rooms and buses and flights all over the country. It was insane. So, I mean, we got to stop that. If you do get in, there should be some sort of moratorium on any kind of social program for maybe while you have a visa.
Did I just come up with that? I mean, it seems like the simplest thing you could ever do is just say you cannot tax the welfare system. You cannot tax Social Security benefits, which I don't think you can right now. You just can't tax anything. You can't take anything from the system for the 5 years you're here, period, full stop, the end. And if that's okay with you, then come. And if you produce jobs and you create X amount of economic activity, let's say you create $10 million worth of economic activity. When you hit $10 million in economic activity, you are pushed to the front of the line and we review your case on a one-off basis. If you hit 5 million, you go next. And that would be actually, like, let's put some goalposts there. Let's set some targets. Hey, you come to the country, you're an Iranian, Persian, amazing entrepreneur, you're a developer, you're an AI developer from Ukraine, you want to come here with your team? Great. What amount of money can you raise on your way in the door? You've got $6 million in venture funding? Great. You go to the front of the line. Let's go. Let's take these great entrepreneurs and creators and builders. Let's sweep the table with them now that we've calmed down this rhetoric around immigration and shut the border, which was a key piece of doing that. All right, let's keep
I don't
moving
think the
here.
DSA has calmed it down. They still want to go back.
They're lunatics. These commies, honestly.
They're on the Democrat Party.
I mean,
Let's talk about
if that's
California, shall we, Jacob?
I mean, yes. Hold on a second. I mean, if they take over the Democratic Party, then I guess I'm a Republican.
Colorado, a 15-term congresswoman, 30 years, lost to a DSA. So it's not just New York. It's not just because of Zohran Mamdani. The DSA is
Correct.
very popular now
Socialism is going to win in
in
America.
any
I
blue
mean,
city.
This is a quick way to, I mean, to Ro Khanna and Rahm Emanuel and to, well, I mean, Ro Khanna is a lost cause, but to Rahm Emanuel, to Shapiro, to anybody
I don't
with
think
half
Ro
a
Khanna-
brain.
why
who's
is
ever
Democrat
been-
Party
I've
has
been
lost
starting
cause.
to
I've been telling
see
you for a
people
long
I know, like on like Instagram and whatnot, start moving on this like reposting like the rent freezing in New York and whatnot and how socialism is the way, etc. I'm just sitting there reading shit like, oh man, some people have literally no education. It's crazy. No critical thinking, no understanding of history, no nothing, right?
time that you may disagree with
Honestly,
what Ro
fucking
Khanna
kind
is
of
doing and saying, but it's
embarrassing, but-
popular in the Democratic Party. I think he's got his finger on the pulse.
Well, he wants
I'm
to
not a
win. I
Democrat,
get it. But I think you have to, the quick win,
Oh, well.
the quick hit, the quick bump of the fentanyl or methamphetamine of communism and socialism to get you a couple ratings point is not worth it long term. You will not win. You're going to lose every moderate, every swing voter, every adult in the room is not voting for a socialist communist lunacy.
We'll see.
They're going to implode the Democratic Party. All right, we'll leave off the other.
You know, and the problem with this is like, okay, like he's saying that. But like we're living in a world, at least here in Western countries, where like people that were like in like my age group or lower grew up with this like internet social media era, right? And these people are all like don't even realize how fucking entitled they are. Like they think it's like a human right to go on vacation like 3 times a year and etc. Right? What many would consider like an extremely lavish lifestyle, they think that that's like a basic right everyone deserves in multiple different like aspects. And when they're not living it, they're coping to the max, and then they fall into these fucking traps, right? Like socialist promises and like whatnot.
There's summer for another time. Let's talk about Gavin with the good hair, Newsom. He says he just balanced the California budget. Newsom announced $351 billion in balance zero deficit budget through 2028. Over to you, Friedberg, from your bunker, the last California stand in the Friedberg capitalist
I'm going to call
bunker.
this the state of California.
The state
The
of
state
California. The lowercase
state of
state.
Cal- That's right. The state of California.
The state of the state.
And there are five.
state.
The state of the state. And there are five
Got it.
chapters to this: the ballooning costs, the accounting tricks, the revenue dependency problem, and now the big exodus and spiraling that's happening, and the looming unaccounted liabilities. These are the problems that California is facing as Gavin puts his bow on his final budget, calls it balanced, and walks away while the House burns. California's state budget ballooned from $215 billion a year in 2019, 6 years ago, to $355 billion today. So a 65% jump in the state budget. And there were a number of these kind of accounting tricks that took place to try and make it look like it's a balanced budget this year, but there's revenue and there's spending. When they call it a balanced budget, that's not the way we all talk about it in the business world, where you have like a P&L, you have revenue and expenses. They have revenue and expenses, and the expenses exceed the revenue. And that little difference, they do a bunch of borrowing against, and then they call it a balanced budget. So all that they've
so
done,
they were able to raise enough debt to cover their whole.
Exactly. So there's
God.
somewhere between 20 and 40 billion of debt that they have a legal ability to just pencil away, and that is now a liability that the state has that the taxpayers are all going to have to pay at some point. That allows them to quote balance the budget.
Oh,
This year.
did
And I'm not gonna get
anybody
into all the
like see like how the voting resulted in California? Extremely suspicious, right? Like statistically, extremely suspicious.
details of what went into this budget, all the money that's being spent. It's crazy. But I think that what's worth taking note of is the revenue dependency the state has. As you all know, the top tax rate in California is 14.4% today. Personal income tax is $142 billion of the state's revenue. Okay? That is $211 billion of revenue the state generates. 142 of it comes from personal income tax. The top 1%, 150,000 people, pay $70 billion, pay half of that tax, of that income. So $70 billion of the state's $210 billion income comes from just the top 1% of payers, 150,000 people, who are already paying the highest tax rate in the country. The top 1,000 people in the state of California pay roughly $22 billion a year. So more than 11% of the state's income. The corporate tax is one of the highest in the country at 8.9%, $43 billion. So it's cheaper to move out of state. If you look at some of the other states, Florida, 5.5%, Tennessee's 6.5%, and Texas is 0. So now if you kind of look at what's happening, there's a massive exodus underway. The corporate exodus, because of the high tax rates, since 2019, at least 15 Fortune 500 companies have moved out of California, moved their headquarters out, not to mention all the local franchises and everything that moved out. 2,100 companies that are mid or large size have moved out of California since 2019. At least 5% of California jobs have been lost as these companies have moved out of the state. And this is the more important and crazy statistic. No one pays attention to this, but we are seeing an average annual exodus of 1 to 1.5% of personal income, meaning the AGI, the adjusted gross income. So people that earn money, about 1 to 1.5% of that income is leaving the state every year right now. That might not sound like a lot, but after 10 years, you've seen 15% of the state's income leave. And obviously with the new billionaire tax that's being proposed, we're going to see an acceleration as the numbers come out for 2025. There's, as we all know, personal friends that have left the state in 25 and many more that'll leave in 26, including our friend David Sachs. So there is a spiraling of a loss of revenue while there's a ballooning in costs. And this is fundamental to the spiraling problem that's occurring. So now, in order to try and make more money,
like, this is the thing, right? It's like this is already known. Even before this was proposed, everyone already knew this was going to happen. But people are so short-sighted, right?
to go further down, they can't just go to the corporates and the high net worth earners. They're now going to the average
You know, the
California.
problem is with
So
humans is that sometimes people just need to learn things the fucking hard way. It's the only way they're going to learn. So, guess we got to do things the hard way when it comes to this.
Sales tax rates this year by creating a new sales tax on software. So if you buy Microsoft Word or you pay for your Gmail subscription or even your ChatGPT account, you have to pay an 8% sales tax on that this year. They're estimating that that sales tax is a brand new one. It'll generate about $1 billion a year in incremental revenue for the state. They're also creating a new tax on healthcare insurance that corporates are going to have to pay that's ultimately going to pass down to the individual. That's going to create another $2 billion a year in taxes on health insurance. The final thing that they did, which we all know about, is they made the temporary top income tax bracket permanent. So, it was only meant to be a temporary to bridge a major budget deficit problem back in 2012, 13.3%, and that became permanent, and now it's increased to 14.4%. So this is the spiraling that takes place. The costs are ballooning, the revenue is leaving, and now there's a scrambling underway in the state of California to try and make up this difference, and they're still falling short. In the out years, 2028, 29, the projection is $40 billion a year in budget deficits every year. Now, looming over the state of California is the fact that there's this insane unaccounted debt problem. California already has $1.4 trillion in public debt. The state has $500 billion, and the local governments have another, call it $800 billion. The state has a reported $664 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. That number, by many estimates, is closer to $1.5 trillion. And then there's a retiree healthcare obligation deficit of $175 billion. You add this all up, there's somewhere around $1.5 to $2 trillion of incremental liabilities that the state has to come up with. And remember, all of those pension liabilities, that trillion...
I don't know. Like, the thing is, like, when you hear about this stuff, it's just so ridiculous to think about, right? Which to me, when I hear this whole, like, tax the rich argument, it's just... It's so ridiculous to hear that when then you hear how the tax money is spent, right? That is the real issue. Is like, how is the money being spent? Like, the whole train system that they're building in California, if you research what's happening with that, it is so fucking insane. insane. Just money being literally fucking incinerated / disappearing for Lord knows fucking what. And that's happening in everything, not just this train system. And it's not just a California thing either, right? It happens like probably everywhere globally at the end of the day. But yeah, like, that kind of stuff, it's so insane, honestly.
$1 billion plus of pension liabilities sits senior to the bonds of the state of California because of something that's known as the California rule. So the state has this looming kind of cliff ahead of it, and there's already the spiraling problem where they're increasing costs because of the demands of the unions and the cost of living and so on, and there's an exodus of corporations and high net worth individuals that pay the taxes. So I would argue that Governor Newsom did not exactly put a bow tie on the budget and create a balanced budget and leave California in a great state as he is wrapping up his final term and his final budget here in the state.
Dev D, I can't even read that. Hello, Dev. How are you on this lovely day? It's a holiday weekend for you, isn't it? Over there in the US.
In fact, I think that this state, which, as I've said in the past, threatens to bring down the union, is on the brink of defaults that are going to be so significant that if the federal government was called in to bail them out because the state cannot declare bankruptcy legally, that all of the red states and all of the other taxpayers in the United States will say, why the hell should I pay federal taxes to bail out California? And I think that's what the story will be over the next decade with the state.
So you predict
the fiscal condition.
AOC and Mondami, president, vice president, AOC. Mondami can't be VP. He wasn't born.
Holiday weekend tired. Me too. It was a holiday here on Wednesday. But I have barely been sleeping the past few days. So it's kind of adding up. Oh well. Dev Damija. Damiha. Dr. Dev Damiha. So that's a lot. Triple D.
I do predict, so I predict AOC will be president. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of dispersion in what can happen here, but I would say AOC would be my front runner based on the movement for the extraordinary cost of
AOC as a president. That would be like I've not watched a whole lot of content from that woman, but every single time I do, I just think to myself, there's no way this person's actually this fucking stupid. Just so uneducated about so much stuff. It's unbelievable. Like, how is that like a popular fucking government member of Congress? It's mind blowing to me. Nice to see you streaming again. You got it the first time. Yeah, we are streaming again for a little bit. I have to leave next Wednesday, I think it is. And then we'll be back here by the 17th. Basically, we'll be here for another week and then leave for a week and then come back. And then I don't know how long I'll be back for, maybe till like mid-August or so, something around then. And we'll go from there. I haven't planned past that at this point. Yeah, it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to be back. There's like definitely, in terms of the quality of life and happiness, it was much better back home. But there are some pros to being here. Say that.
Living in the United States right now, largely because of government spending. Yep. The fact that people are seeing this wealth disparity, those two things are going to continue to drive the socialist movement over the next 24 months. And if AOC comes in and they bail out California and they federalize California's liabilities, you're going to see parts of this union, the red states, as they're
Texas,
called,
Florida,
the Texas
Nevada,
of the world, that are going to say, why should we be part of this union anymore? We don't want to pay for all of these liabilities that these blue states have accrued and that we are now being asked to bail out. And that is where I think you face a crisis of the union in the years ahead.
Okay. Sachs, Texas,
and I think California is the first. Yeah.
In this scenario, I mean, it's pretty far-fetched, but it's not far-fetched that you would need a federal bailout to get California out of this in the next couple of years, and the government needs a bailout itself with
massive, this Gavin Newsom guy, from watching him speak and whatnot, seems like just, I don't know, a snake oil salesman. But he does a good job of it. Like, if someone's gonna be president, it'd be that over AOC, right?
We're going to be at $2-3 trillion a year for the next couple of years. So, go ahead, Mafia.
There's something that's going to happen. I think that Freeberg is right up until the point of the federal absorption. I think what will happen is that you'll wipe out the California pensions and you'll wipe out the pension obligations and you'll do some sort of negotiated settlement. And I think that's where you're going to have a wholesale replacement of the California Constitution. You'll have a complete redistricting. I think you will have a complete red wave in the state, and you will disassemble and dismantle everything that caused California to be so poorly run that got them to this place. So I agree with David. All of the issues that he painted it's unbelievable. By the way, there's an incredible tweet. I think her name is Joanna Ives. Maybe Nick, you can find it. But she compared the last 8 years of DeSantis versus JB Pritzker. And I asked my team, hey, can you create a table that actually adds Newsom to the list so that you can do the 3-person comparison? Because it's quite staggering how broken these blue states have become and how they continue to try to spend their way out of what is being shown is just general incompetence. They're not good at managing. They're not good at running things. They're not good at delivering results. And unfortunately, until they feel the brunt of what mismanagement actually means, which is that all the people that have paid into this system, sadly and unfortunately and avoidably, will be the ones that get punished, we will unfortunately not learn in California. Find this tweet and read it, and you would just be shocked at how unbelievably good DeSantis has been in running Florida and how unbelievably tragically bad JB Pritzker is. And then just ask your favorite AI, compare California on the spectrum of Florida versus Illinois. And what you'll find is California is even worse than Illinois in most of those comparisons.
Sax, you want to give us the last word here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my decision to go to Texas is looking better and better.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
I said when this BTA thing, the so-called Billionaire Tax Act, was proposed, and everyone was saying that it's a very low probability this happens. I was like, I don't really see why it would be low probability. I think it's going to get on the ballot. All you have to do is collect a certain number of signatures. It's not that hard. And then once it's on the ballot, I don't see why it wouldn't pass. And everyone's like, no, Gavin Newsom has assured us that he'll kill it. He'll make some backroom deal, get rid of it. And on the day, the final day, where BTA was going to be dropped from the ballot or not, Newsom came out with a video on X where he basically endorsed more taxes on billionaires. And this was right after the TSA candidates won in New York. So he sees the writing on the wall. He's not going to come out
By the way,
publicly.
the problem with the billionaire tax is that if it does get passed and it isn't obviated by the 3 other ballot initiatives that actually negate it, you're going to have 200 or 300 individual lawsuits that will take a decade to meander through the courts. And ultimately, I think a lot of people have standing here. And I just wonder, what will they have proven at that point? Because it'll be a decade later. It'll be 2036.
A lawsuit over
and the
what?
California government will have had to spend billions of dollars on legal fees to fight all these billionaires, all to end up losing at the Supreme Court anyways.
By then, they'll probably have like a federal wealth tax or something like that.
The tragedy
I mean,
of it all is that California, at various points in recent history, has had a surplus because of the massive tax base from Silicon Valley. They could have managed this. Their incompetence, their selfishness, and their corruption is what has caused this. They could have, if any state could have balanced its budget, it is California because of our massive tax
There
receipts.
needs to be a hard landing. I really hope it doesn't result in the wipeout of these pensions. I think the pensioners should be extremely upset with
It's not gonna happen,
California
Chamath.
Democratic politics.
Look, this idea that somehow things get bad enough where you get a red wave in super blue California and everything gets magically fixed, not going to happen. What's going to happen is a blue state's going to get bluer. And
That's right. Socialism.
the remedy for more and more socialism is going to be to intensify the socialism. And there's going to be
That's right.
a giant final confiscation.
Then we're going to deal with the California bankruptcy in the next 10 years. And
Can't
it
go
is
bankrupt.
unfortunately, and it will unfortunately result in a complete restructuring of those debt and obligations. And this is where I think you're going to wipe out a lot of these things that people are guaranteeing. I don't think you're going to see these pensions on it.
If you just look at the budget per person, places like Texas and Florida spend about $5,000 per citizen on services. If you divide the budget by the population, and then you look at New York City, it's close to $13,000, and you look at California, close to $9,000, and you simply do not get 2 or 2.5 times or 2.x times the value living in those states in terms of services.
So the problems are all
And
worse.
it's competence. Yes, it's worse.
problems
And it
are
really,
worse.
the more you look to that state government to solve your problems, the more problems you will have. In Texas, if you got
Well,
a ranch, it's up to
it also
you.
just seems these blue states attract these derelict, incompetent people.
Yes,
I mean,
grifters,
Well, look,
lunatics,
let me explain
incompetence.
they're so incompetent. My
Yes,
God,
it
they're
just has
so
to do with
bad.
competence. And it also is the populace being self-reliant. If you live in Texas,
No.
when you get your ranch, they say, hey, here's your ranch. And then it's up to you to figure out, hey, who's going to pick up my garbage? And, oh, do I want a well? Do I want to use a city water? What's my energy situation going to be? And people make these kind of thoughtful decisions with us. They don't look to the state for every single handout or hand-holding. There's a ruggedness and a rugged individualism and self-reliance that makes the state not have to tax
Understand.
everybody to 54, 60, 65%. I guarantee you, Friedberg and Chamath, you will be paying 60 to 65% tax if you stay in California. And
Actually, this should be capped at 10%. I don't know what the ideal number is, but they can certainly be lower. If we were living in a world where there wasn't just tremendous amounts of like needless spending and whatnot, they could definitely be lower. We'll say that. Like, I'm surprised, like those videos of like the fraud being uncovered in the different states in the U.S. didn't go like, I mean, whatever. I guess they did go like viral in some capacity, but it seems like people have like forgotten about it. Whereas like if I was like living there and that shit was happening on that scale, I'll be fucking seeing red. I'll be so fucking mad. Are you kidding me? Getting like fucking half my money stolen every year just to get pissed away on Lord knows what.
I tell you, New York, it's at 54 right now. I guarantee you it breaks 60 or it will be proposed to break 50. We'll see if they stop it by the end of Mondami's reign in my hometown.
Look, let me tell you what leftism is, okay? It's basically just people trying to string together words to justify taking your money, okay? And they're just experimenting. It's like monkeys.
There was a constitutional cap on taxation, and government can't expand excessively. It would be forced to be efficient with tax dollars. I mean, yeah, but like, do you need a constitutional cap on taxation for them to be efficient? Like, why is that a prerequisite to being efficient? Why don't you just do your job properly? Like, right? But like, the other thing about it is like, the game theory of politics has like kind of like almost trapped them into doing this at this point. It's like, if you're not gonna go when you're like on your doing your campaigning and you're not promising free shit, no one's voting for you. So you, whether you fucking believe it or not, that's like the only thing you can do at this point, unless you just want to lose the vote. I was talking about it earlier, but like people like from my age group and whatnot and younger are eating that up. Everything is like because of old people buying homes and billionaires and company or like CEOs, blah blah. Like nothing is their fault basically, right? Everything's everybody else's fault. Victim mindset. Original forefathers were interested in constitutional cap on taxes because politicians will pass legislation to change tax levels. Yeah, it's like a mess. It's a mess. This whole thing is a mess. And taxing the rich is not going to solve anything. It just makes it worse in the long term.
Typing on a keyboard with words to try and hack everyone's brains to basically figure out how to steal all of their money. And some of those words are virtue signaling, some of them are guilt tripping and moral accusations. Whatever it is, there's always some new words, but it's never to solve a problem. In fact,
so the problem with this situation is like I don't even see like what is the way out of this for the US? That's my question. Like, how do you recover from the path that you were on, aside from just a massive like civil war / the country just fails and no longer superpower? Because like, let's suppose it keeps going on its current trend. This is going to be the same story that's happened in past attempts at like socialism in the long term. A lot of pain. And I don't know how we veer off that path, like ending up in that situation as of now.
Worse. It's just to figure out how to separate you from your money. And I had this thought when I saw that like Mackenzie Bezos, you know, just giving away like
aside from like entering some like AI powered age of abundance, I suppose.
$1 billion, 26 billion of Jeff Bezos' money to all these left-wing causes.
Hey, she earned it too.
And well, but putting that aside, she gave away all this money. I'm like, oh, okay, so now like world hunger is fixed, right? Because remember how they told us that it was because of Elon Musk's greed that he refused to hand over, he didn't fork over a big chunk of his money, and with that money we could have fed the whole world and solved world hunger. So why isn't the problem solved now that she just donated 26 billion? That's what they said Elon needed to do to solve world hunger. They always treat your money as if it belongs to them or belongs to the government, and it's your greed and selfishness that's creating all these problems. None of these problems have been fixed. What's the proof that any of that money did anything? All it did was go to line the pockets of all these leftists.
Funnily enough, I was watching basically it's like a documentary about foreign aid from Canada and the US going to Africa, and like they like what's really happening with that money and all these like charity donations, and it was fucking hilarious. Some of these charities are fucking balling out over there.
NGOs
living their best life, and that shit's not going to no charity. Not helping shit. And not only that, but it was quite an interesting perspective of like the fact that we are doing that for those countries is also like a detriment long term, because it's like dampening their ability to progress, because they don't have like the need like to survive and do anything possible to survive and advance. If you're like being coddled in a way, you're not like advancing as fast as you could be. Pretty interesting stuff. Can you watch Should You Be Scared of the Bond Markets by Gary's Economics? If we have time, yeah, I have to go within an hour, probably. Like an hour, probably the max. Might leave before then. I'm familiar with that guy. Although I will say, sometimes I don't know. That guy's like, that definitely is some opinions I don't agree with that guy has.
And, buy them more houses or pay
She
them
would
higher
have been better
salaries.
off investing in Ohalo
No
and
problems get
other
solved.
companies. If literally, I hate to break this news.
What does the Polymarket say on Gavin's chances of?
He's down to. I
becoming
think he's
president?
plummeting. He's plummeting. Yeah, Gavin's down to 20. He peaked at 40.
That's quite high, though.
I mean, I think people are realizing it's a great haircut and a really smooth talker. But just like he stole other things in his life, he's going to steal your money. Period. Full stop. I'm not going to get into details.
I think he's lower in these polls because the Democratic Party is moving left, is moving to the
Yes,
TSA.
look at
and
AOC.
people think he's too moderate.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
he
AOC's
is.
going up, and this John Ossoff guy's come out of nowhere. They're all to the left of Gavin Newsom.
Kamala
So
Ding
Newsom's
Dong's still here.
problem, and this is why he put out that video on the day that he was supposed to kill the BTA. He puts out a video
Next
endorsing
time it's 1 hour long. He might start it. This thing's done basically.
billionaire taxes, is because he needs to
Or
position
maybe she'll do something else.
himself to being more DSA adjacent.
Well, to be fair to Newsom, he also on the same day said he's against the Billionaire Tax Act and he's voting against it. This was his hedging video, which is to kind of zoom out his policy on, hey, this BTA doesn't make sense, but I do agree we need more taxation. I think was kind of the intention.
we
Yeah, it
all
was his
have
hedge, but
agreed
also he
on
failed.
margin
He failed
loans
to kill
having
BTA.
taxes.
Everyone thought, all these California billionaires and these chat groups thought Newsom would be their savior.
That's right.
And that was a big mistake.
What's it like, Sachs? What's it like in that group chat? Tell us about that group chat. What's it like in there? What's the meme? What's the meme like in there? Woo! In the
Can I say two
billionaire
things,
group
please?
chat. Go ahead.
It's 8:06 p.m. here. I have a meeting I have to go to. I want to say I love you and I miss all of you. And I want to say a huge happy birthday to the most incredible country in the world. I could not have imagined my life being any better in any place. I feel so blessed and so lucky to be an American. I feel so thankful. I feel so grateful. It really is the best country in the world.
We have to fight for it.
Yeah, we have to fight for it. Yeah, and on behalf of those of us who
Happy
have been
birthday,
here,
America.
happy birthday. And for those of us who have been
Love
here
you
for
guys.
7 generations, we think you're doing a good job. We're going to let you stay here. We're going to let you stay. On behalf
JKL,
of
how can we take away your citizenship? That's what I want, is a law where we can revoke JKL citizenship.
7
We should put the vote.
generation bitches. I've been
Which
here.
the 4 of us should be deported? I think you would lose.
Part that gets interesting towards the
no.
end of the video.
We'll find some constitutional loophole.
Enemy Aliens Act.
Bye, Jason.
All right. Feel free. On
We'll
that
see.
note, happy birthday, America. And 250
Best
more
country in the
great
world.
ones. Best country in the world. Give a f you think, Democratic, Socialist, commie scumbags. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Love you, boys. Bye.
Boom.
Okay, welcome back to Gary's Economics. Today we are going to explain.
Let's get a quick
everything
summary
you
of
need to know
this. Or anything. I'm zooming. Okay.
bond markets. Okay, I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, why is Gary wearing a vest? The reason is because it is incredibly hot in London. Now the elephant in the room has been handled. We can move on to the next thing that you're thinking, which is why is Gary not talking about Keir Starmer resigning and Andy Burnham becoming the next Prime Minister? And that is because we all knew that was going to happen like weeks and months ago. If you really want to know about that, you can watch my video from 3 weeks ago. Open that in a new tab and you can watch it afterwards. What we want to talk about today is, I want to give a really good explanation of something which is more important in a way, which is not the sort of the face who is in charge, but really the economic power that has been driving economics and politics in this country for at least about a year and a half, and which is going to drive economics and politics increasingly in basically every country in the world in the next sort of 5-10 years, and that is bond markets. Bond markets have been tremendously badly covered in the media, almost comically bad. My favourite moment of absurd media coverage of the bond markets is this from The Guardian last year. YouTube radicals such as Gary Stevenson act as if John Maynard Keynes had never been born. Without wealth tax, the UK will soon go bankrupt, he warns. An unlikely thing to happen in one of the richest countries in the world with its own money printing press.
They already had it. Like, this is just another example, right? Like, what was the stat in 2024? I think it was like a millionaire was leaving the UK on average every like fucking 10 minutes or something. But just some ridiculous exodus of wealth happened here.
Traders are about to bring down the government, he told Guardian readers in January. 10 months later, we await the excitement. That is Aditya Chakraborty, hilariously failing to recognise that the bond markets have been basically in charge of his government for about a year and a half. We'll get back to that, but first we need to explain what is a bond. All right, so I want to really break this down like from absolute basics so you really understand bond markets, government bond markets, and we have to start with what is a bond. The most important thing to understand, if you want to be clear about this, is very simple. A bond is a loan. I think that is the first thing. If you replace the word bond with a loan, it's going to make everything much easier to understand. The government borrows a lot of money and it borrows that money using bonds. A bond is a loan. The government borrows money from largely wealthy people, also things like pension funds, and it calls those loans bonds. The only difference between a bond and a loan is you can sell a bond. So for example, if I lent Jack £100, he gives me like a IOU, Jack owes me £100, and then I can sell that to Dave for £90, and then Jack owes Dave £100. So a bond is literally just a loan, but we can sell it, we can transfer it between each other. The reason these are important is because governments all across the world borrow really an enormous amount of money. Whenever the government wants to spend money on things like education or healthcare or pensions or things like investment like building a new bridge or a new train line or a new road or a new hospital, it broadly has two ways to cover that spending. It covers most of its expenditure through taxation, but when it has big payments to make, like for example, especially when we have big crises like 2008 or like COVID, or perhaps when governments want to make big investments, they tend to borrow the money to do those things. Over the years, especially because of the many recent economic crises, governments have been borrowing more and more money. The total amount of UK government debt is roughly equivalent to about 100% of GDP, so equivalent to roughly everything the country produces in a year. That comes out at about £43,000 per person. So your share of the government debt is £43,000 per person. That's not per adult, that's per person. So if you've got like a newborn child, he owes £43,000, he or she, obviously. So it's a lot. UK government debt is a lot. But that 100%, I think the exact number is just over 100%. It's pretty normal for advanced Western countries. US, France, and Italy all owe slightly more as a percentage of their economy, about 120, 130%. Germany and Australia owe slightly less, about 50 or 60%. And Japan famously owns much more, about 200%. But these are big numbers. £43,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. That is how much you owe to primarily richer people as your share of the government debt. Yeah, huge amount of money. And the way that this tends to work is the government will, when the government borrows money using a bond, using a loan, the average length of that loan, the time period of that loan in this country is something like 12 to 13 years. And because the government has been borrowing for, hundreds of years, they're constantly having to pay off the loans from 12, 13 years ago. So I looked up just this morning, like when are the government's loans due? And the government has like tons of different loans. So the government has one big repayment of the loan due on the 22nd of July this year, one on the 22nd of October, one on the 29th of January next year, one on the 7th of March in 2027. So basically, sort of every 3 months or so, the government has to make a big repayment of one of its loans from 12 or 13 years ago or something like this. And the way that it always makes those repayments is it basically refinances the loan. So it's a bit like if you had a mortgage, which was a 10-year mortgage or say a 5-year mortgage, you've got a 5-year fixed rate on that. After 5 years, you have to go back to the bank and you have to say, okay, I want to extend this loan. What rate will you give me now? And when this happens, obviously you would go to your bank and ask to extend the mortgage. But what governments tend to do is they go to government bond traders. So the eventual lenders, the people at the end of the chain who lend the money to governments are usually wealthy individuals, things like pension funds, sometimes foreign governments. And you yourself could also buy government bonds. I am a holder of government bonds in my sort of investment account. But largely, the vast majority of government bond purchases, people who lend money to the government when a previous loan expires, are the bond traders. I was a short-term interest rates trader for a long time. It's very similar to a bond trader. But when the government has a loan maturing, it will basically go to financial market traders and it will say, we need to borrow £50 billion, £20 billion, and they will do an auction, which essentially it's a kind of gamified negotiation between the government and the bond traders. What interest rate will you charge us if we want to borrow £20 billion on 22nd of July? Now, this is why the interest rate matters, because every 3 months, the government has to refinance one of these loans. A lot of these loans are currently at very low interest rates because we had a period of time from 2008 until about 2022 when central bank base rates in the UK and across the world, Bank of England base rates, Fed, ECB base rates were zero. And this meant that wealthy people couldn't get much interest on their money. So they were very willing to lend money to the government for very low interest rates, as low as 1, or even I think during COVID, it felt as low as almost 0%, almost interest free. But now many of these loans.
This intro past is the duh part. Duh. I mean dull. Or do you mean like obvious?
Sort of 2010s period are coming due, and the government is having to refinance these loans. And if
I mean, the thing is, a lot of people like, from my gathering of this guy's YouTube channel, it seems like it's like a beacon or a finance channel kind of thing. So it kind of makes sense that he has to kind of explain a lot of this stuff in the like bare bones from the ground level.
if it cannot convince the financial market traders to lend them the money at a good, cheap interest rate, then every few months, the interest rate which the government has to pay on its very, very large government debt, remember it's in this country, £43,000 per person, it's a bit more in a lot of other Western countries. If they cannot convince the traders to refinance those loans at a decent rate every 3 months, the rate of interest that the government is paying on this very, very big stockpile of debt is going to slowly creep up over time. Okay, why does that matter? We did cover this in a video last year, which I will put a link to here, but I'll cover it quickly again. The reason it matters is that if you are paying large amounts of interest on your debt, then your debt is going to grow over time. And the government has a bit of an advantage when it comes to managing large amounts of debt. Well, it has two advantages specifically, which is one, inflation, I, which I call it I, and economic growth, which I've written here as G. So when the government borrows money, just like if you borrow money on a mortgage, that is not adjusted for inflation. Well, technically, in the UK government's case, some of their loans are adjusted for inflation, but most are not, and in most countries of the world, the majority are not. So what that means is, if we have large inflation, like we have had in the last few years, the value of the cost, the price of everything in the economy can go up 20, 30, 40%, but the debt stays the same, which means that if effectively the stock of debt, the amount of debt the UK government has, is being devalued by inflation every single year. This is similar to sort of if you buy a house for £500,000, you borrow £400,000, and then there's a load of inflation, the house price doubles to £1 million. Your debt relative to the value of a house has fallen. It's the same. If you have a lot of inflation, prices go up, the debt of the government falls relative to inflation. Growth is more of a real thing, which is, again, the amount that the government owes on its loans is not adjusted based on government growth, based on economic growth, sorry. So if the economy is growing, the size of the debt relative to the size of the economy is going to shrink every year. So these two factors together, inflation plus growth, work together to make the debt smaller relative to the size of the economy. And what this plays against is the interest rate, which I'm going to call here R. So basically, you have a kind of contest between these two factors, inflation and growth versus the interest rate. So the reason that the UK is in a bit of a tricky spot now, and has been for a couple of years, is because over time, as interest rates have been trending up globally, the interest rate in the UK has been ticking up to close to 5%. So at the moment, looking today, the UK interest rate on 10-year loans, which is sort of average level, average length of the loan, is 4.77%. The reason this is a problem is that if we look at inflation and growth, economic growth in the UK and in most of Europe has been pretty low for a long time. It's been sort of long-term trending at something about 1% a year, not very high. And the inflation rate, which is targeted by the central bank in the UK, is 2% a year. They've generally been failing at that. It's been a bit higher. But if we assume that the Bank of England is good at its job, inflation should go back to about 2%, and economic growth, it's on a long-term trend of about 1%. So if we add these together, we get 3%, which is significantly less than 4.77%. This means that we are in a state where every year that debt stock is going to grow by its own accord, basically. This difference is only 1.77%. Inflation has been higher, which is going to help. But if inflation goes back down, and crucially, if this were to go up, that could start to become a big difference relatively quickly. And then traders
Like,
start
what's the point of
worrying,
this
okay,
video? Like, he's basically just like, I mean, like based on the summary, like I don't like. I'm curious what he's bringing that is new to this conversation. I guess is probably the best way to phrase it. It's like everything that's happening with this is like already known, right? Like Ray Dalio has like written books on it at this point, and like all like it's just a constant known thing that's been happening.
well, is that debt just going to grow and grow and grow in an exponential fashion? So the real risk of this risk of the interest rates slowly going up in a way that means that the debt starts to grow is basically something which I've mentioned a number of times on this channel before, which is compound interest, which is if you grow by 2% a year, 2% a year doesn't seem like much, but within 10, 20, 30 years, it grows in an exponential way. But it will be more than exponential, right? Because if the traders can see that your debt is growing, they're going to start worrying that in the long run, you might not be able to pay the debt back, or you might be tempted to do what the Guardian suggested, which is just print tons of money, which is not going to be great for people who are owed money because the money will be devalued, and they are going to start demanding higher interest rates. And then if the interest rate goes up, then you have to pay more interest, which makes your financial position even less sustainable, which means that you have to pay more interest every year, and it means the traders are going to ask even higher interest rates, which in turn makes your financial position less sustainable, which leads to higher interest rates. So you have the potential for this negative feedback loop, which is high interest rates lead to negative perception of government finances, which leads to even higher interest rates, which leads to even worse perception of government finances, and this can get bigger and bigger.
End of the video, he explains the function of wealth versus government and the projection of future events if we don't fix the issues.
getting bigger, and this has the potential to lead to what is sometimes described.
He explains why taxing the ultra rich makes sense. I mean, we'll see. I doubt it. But we'll see.
In the press as a death loop or a doom loop. And this is essentially what happened last January. So the reason that The Guardian wrote this article last year. So I was interviewed my paperback of my book, The Trading Game. #1 on Spotify last year, fantastic, great book. I was interviewed for The Guardian last year, January, which is when the paperback came out. And this thing happened, which was the interest rate on the government bonds were getting higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And it was really at risk of starting this kind of doom loop spiral. It was only sort of 6 months into the Starmer government. And really, like the UK government, the Labour leadership, Starmer and Reeves, they kind of had no choice but to like totally like shit themselves, like massively back down, massively retrench any spending plans. This is why they tried to do things like cut benefits, tried to think about how can we raise taxes, because we had this situation last year in January in this country where there was a very, very real possibility of the bond markets basically decapitating the UK government in a very similar way to what they did to Liz Truss in, when was Truss, 2020? When did the Queen die? God bless her soul. 2022, let's say, Liz Truss. Financial markets essentially deposed one British Prime Minister within something insane like 45 days or something, just a few years ago, very soon after coming into office. And they were really at threat of decapitating the Starmer government in the beginning of 2025 after just 6 months. They got very lucky, the UK government, they got a good inflation print, which meant that interest rates came down a bit. We'll get into that a little bit later. But the truth is, ever since that moment, January 2025, and when I talk to politicians, Labour politicians or people in government, you really, really get this sense. These guys are basically terrified that anything that they might do economically, anything that might want to do economically, will cause a repeat of what happened to Starmer and Reeves. Reeves is still our Chancellor, for those who are not in the UK, which is the finance.
I mean, they don't control the bond market, right? So if they do policy that the bond market doesn't agree with, it's gonna fucking show up.
They are constantly terrified that what happened to Liz Truss in 2022 and what very, very nearly happened to Keir Starmer in 2025 will happen again. And this absolutely dominates their economic policy. And it has meant that really our government, and if you're not in the UK, I guarantee you this will happen to your government, it probably already is happening, has been ever since January 2025, like completely handcuffed by this terror, basically, that anything it might do which is not approved of by bond market financial traders will lead to doom and will lead to like a forced deposition of the Prime Minister. And this is why I really enjoyed when The Guardian, because I don't think anything could be more Guardian than to have the financial markets like basically do like a hostile takeover of your government and enforce austerity on working people, and to have the Guardian 1 year later like laugh at it because they haven't realised that it's happened. Like I think this is I think nothing could describe more the British upper middle class, because of course what has happened is richer people such as the people who write for The Guardian and some of the people who read it have been protected whilst the poor have been decimated, largely because the bond markets have basically taken over the UK government if it wasn't serious it would be more funny.
This has always been the case. It's not some new development.
It's just this article, how funny Gary said that bond markets would take over the country. It's incredibly let them eat cake, isn't it? Look that up if you don't know what it is. Another cultural reference from Gary's Economics. Okay, so next, what can we do? You probably don't want to be in this situation where your government's economic and financial policies are totally dominated by a bunch of financial market traders who are not democratically elected and are usually quite rich people and don't have any particular reason to care for the well-being of the people in your country. What can we do? Can we stop it? I think the best way to discuss how we should respond to this, how we can stop it, is to deal with, I think, the three main misconceptions and misrepresentations.
This is part of the thing I don't like about this guy. Is like when he phrases things like that, he's like painting these people as like evil or like negative people. Like it's not. They're just trying to conduct effective business.
That have been very prevalent in the British press in the last sort of 6 months, 1 year. So I've got a list here of 3 nonsense stories about the bond markets. And the first one is that all of this bond market nonsense is entirely the fault of Andy Burnham. So for those who don't know, Andy Burnham was Mayor of Manchester. He is almost certainly going to become the British Prime Minister in the next couple of months, maybe even in the next few weeks. And the press here in the UK has been understandably in this kind of psychodrama of, will Andy Burnham become Prime Minister? When will Andy Burnham become Prime Minister? And there has been a continuing trend of basically largely coming from more right-wing newspapers, basically saying that the whole reason that UK borrowing costs are high, UK interest rates are high, is because Andy Burnham, financial markets hate Andy Burnham doesn't know anything about economics, this kind of stuff. And that analysis is basically completely nonsense, and I'll explain why. So in order to explain this, we need to discuss a little bit about what is it that the investors in government bonds, so the people who lend to big national governments, like the British or American governments, what do they want? Okay, so you need to think about why would an investor, a very wealthy person, decide to lend money to governments, decide to buy government bonds when they could do other things like buy the stock market. The stock market has gone up enormously in the last few years, or buy gold. The gold price has gone up enormously in the last few years. Why would you choose to lend money to the government, buy government bonds? When you lend money to the government, you know exactly what you're going to get back. You're going to get what you lent in, and plus your 4.5%, 5% every year that it's in there. It's not like a particularly sexy return. You're not going to get what you make buying some of these tech stocks, or what you're going to get if you bought Bitcoin, or even the gold price has gone crazy. So you're totally losing your ability to own assets which could double or treble in value, like we've seen from a lot of the stock markets in the world in the last few years, and like we've seen from the gold price. So why would you choose to buy? Why would you choose to make this like relatively unsexy investment choice, which doesn't have a lot of growth potential, which doesn't have a lot of upside? And the reason investors like to do it is basically two things, which is diversity and security. So the first thing to recognize is a lot of investors in government bonds.
It's not how they're taking all their money and just dumping it in bonds, right? Just diversifying, and not just in one country. So let's just say your entire portfolio was straight bonds only. You would still want to diversify that, right? Different countries at different rates, and that way, even if one country does fail in some hyper unrealistic scenario, you're not fucked. Agreed. I think it's good to hear his viewpoint. I mean, he's not the only person with this perspective. Yeah. Fair. I think that's why we're watching, right?
Just own government bonds. They also own stocks and gold. So and property and land and what invest. And I've spoken about this in my Iran War video. How I own a lot of oil. And it's really what most rich people want to do is build a very diversified portfolio of assets. If you're very rich, you don't need to put all your eggs in one basket. You can basically afford to buy a little bit of everything. So most wealthy people, especially very wealthy people, will own a lot of stocks and a decent amount of gold. They probably have a property portfolio, and they will also have a big chunk of government bonds, loans to government. And the reason they like the government bonds is because government bonds tend to do well at times of economic crisis. So you'll probably be aware that when there's really bad economic news, like most recently, most obviously, things like the Iran war or the Trump tariff crisis from, was that last year? From last year or a couple of years ago? I think it was last year, Trump tariff crisis. When those things happen, the stock markets tend to suddenly fall quite a lot. And stock markets can fall 20, 30%. If you look at the gold price, stock markets now, they've gone up so much, there's a very real chance of a very aggressive fall down. Government bonds tend not to do that, and because we know exactly how much money we're going to get back, and we know we're going to get exactly our 4 or 5% interest every year, they are an incredibly steady but unsexy option, and they just give you a regular, steady income every single year. And this is why they are seen as the secure option. And they're a very popular investment for very low risk investors. So a lot of pension funds will own a lot of government bonds because pensioners like to have a steady, stable income. A lot of insurance companies will have government bonds. If you have a lot of money in a bank, in just a bank savings account, they will probably be using that money to buy government bonds to lend to the government, because they don't know where you're going to take their money out. So basically, any investor that either is so rich they want to have a very diversified portfolio, or for some reason is very risk averse and wants a very stable, secure investment, is going to buy government bonds. So what do government bond investors want, and what do government bond investors not want? So the number one thing which government bond investors want, people who lend to the government want, is low inflation. And the reason behind this is when we have inflation, like we've had a lot of in the last 5-10 years, is the price of everything goes up. The price of everything goes up, and this generally includes stock prices, gold prices, house prices, land prices. But what it doesn't include is government bond prices, because if you lend money to the government, then you have a fixed return on that. You're going to get your £100 plus your 5% interest, and that is not going to go up. So if we suddenly have a very inflationary situation, government bond investors really, really lose. So if you are thinking, and this is something which is relevant to you, right? It's the same if you put your money in a bank account. If you just put money in a bank account and get 5%, suddenly there's an inflation crisis and the price of everything goes up by double. You've effectively lost half of your money, right? So government bond investors hate high inflation. Second thing that government bond investors want is stable government finances. This was the big thing that really hit Liz Truss. Liz Truss came in, suddenly slashed tax on rich people. Government bond investors were looking at that and thinking, well, is she actually going to be able to pay us back? There's this saying in markets, the return of your capital is more important than the return on your capital. You don't want to be lending money to somebody who seems just like they don't have any concern for their long-term capacity to pay your money back. And there's two risks on that. There's one risk is if their finances are very unstable, that they literally won't be able to pay you back. The other risk I think is sort of hinted at in that Guardian quote that I said at the beginning. So they said this interesting thing in the Guardian quote, which is it's unlikely the UK will go bankrupt when it has its own money printing press. And this is one thing which, in an age of increasingly unstable government finances, one thing which government bond investors are always wary of is that maybe the government will be like, well, we can't afford to pay these guys back, so let's just print the money. And I think I've done videos on money printing in the past. We'll try and find one, we'll link it up. But you know, if you look at the history of collapsing empires, collapsing societies, I think we're in collapsing empire, a collapsing empire and a collapsing society now, not just here in the UK, but across the Western world, in the US. There almost always comes a point where governments just think, you know what, let's just fucking print tons of money. And what that almost always does is cause an inflation crisis. I think we can make a good argument that this is part of what happened in COVID. Again, this is a risk of causing a massive inflation. And if there is a massive inflation, you don't want to be holding the bonds, you want to be holding the assets.
No,
so
random side tangent.
Unstable government finances.
But like, you know, people are all about the redistribution of wealth and whatnot. But like, we kind of just ran this experiment, did we not? During COVID, it was giving away a shit ton of money for people for nothing, basically. And like, how many of those people, if we were to go back and survey all the people that got given money during COVID, how many of them made effective use of it? Probably not many.
Are bad because they might mean you don't get your money back, and they might mean that the government really basically deflates the money before you get it. And the third thing which government bond investors want is they want low central bank interest rates. So this is very slightly technical, but if you're in the UK, you'll be aware there is a government institution, sort of quasi-independent government institution called the Bank of England that sets the interest rate every month. There is a similar institution in the US called the Federal Reserve, in Europe the ECB, in Australia the RBA. Every country has one of these, and they try to set the interest rate on cash.
No, I was just saying it was like a random, like something he said made me think about it, but yeah,
maybe every month, every 6 weeks, to basically try to keep inflation like low and steady. And if they think inflation is going up, then they're going to raise the interest rate. And we've seen obviously a lot of that happening in the last 5 years since COVID. Inflation's been high, so interest rates have gone up. And if you are a government bond investor, you don't want this, because if you think interest rates are going to go up, and this is something I made a lot of my money on it when I was a trader. During COVID, interest rates were like zero. And the interest rate you could get in government bond was like less than 1%. Obviously, after COVID, the interest rate went up very quickly. And now, as you know, government bonds in the UK trade at about 5%, depending on the maturity, how long term they are. The reason that the government bond prices have gone up is largely because the central bank interest rate has gone up. When you have cash in a bank, the government pays your bank interest on that based on the central bank interest rate, which means if you shop around, you can normally get something similar to the central bank base rate on a savings account on your cash. If you're not getting that, shop around, try and get a better rate. But if you are seeing, say we know that, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, say we're in a situation now where we know there's going to be another inflation crisis and interest rates are going to go up to 10%, but I don't want to buy a government bond now that's paying me 5% when I know that if I hold onto the cash, I'll be able to get 10% on the cash.
Wants government to gain control of its assets again. What is the definition of its assets? That's quite a broad statement.
So these are the main three things which government bond investors want. They want low inflation, stable government finances, and they want low central bank interest rates. Low central bank interest rates and low inflation are quite connected, because if inflation is low, probably the interest rates will be low as well. But this is the thing you need to know in order to understand why the attacks on Andy Burnham in the last few months have been kind of nonsense, right? So you are probably aware there is still, I think at the moment of speaking, a war in Iran, although every single day there's rumours of a peace deal that's been happening for months. And that war in Iran has aggressively pushed up the price of oil and many other things all around the world, and it is causing increases in inflation all around the world. And one thing that is particular about this inflation crisis and this war in Iran is there's really a lot of uncertainty about, and there has been from the very beginning, about how long the war will last, and as a result, like how big of an impact it is going to have on global oil prices. Oil affects the price of global energy. Energy is used in the production of basically everything. So if the oil price goes up, the price of everything goes up, which means that in the last few months, there's been a huge amount of uncertainty in the world, amongst traders, amongst economists, about what inflation is going to be. The central bank sets its interest rate to respond to inflation. So if inflation is uncertain, then the interest rate is uncertain. And that means that traders all over the world, especially interest rate traders, are just constantly reading the news, watching their phones, talking to each other, basically to try to figure out when the Iran war is going to end. And that level of extreme uncertainty, because as you now know, government bond investors are very, very concerned in inflation, central bank interest rates, and government financial sustainability. And all of these three things are really heavily affected by the question of how long will the Iran war last. What that means is the huge amount of uncertainty about all of those three factors has meant that government bonds have become incredibly volatile in financial markets. And what that means is, you'll get in a given day where the interest rate will move, the kind of size which previously you might have seen that move might take a month. That move will be happening in a day or 2 days. And that has been happening quite consistently in the last few months, ever since the Iran war started. Government bond prices and government bond interest rates have been incredibly volatile because of all of this uncertainty about inflation and uncertainty about interest rates. And that has obviously coincided in this country in the last few months with a period of intense speculation about whether and when Keir Starmer will resign. He has resigned. Congratulations, Keir Starmer. And whether and when Andy Burnham will become Prime Minister. So you've had these two things happening at the same time, which is We don't know when the Iran war will end. We don't know what inflation will be. And we don't know if Andy Burnham will be Prime Minister. And that has meant that we have had, on a few occasions, we'd have a day where something happens about Andy Burnham and it looks like he's going to be Prime Minister. And on the same day, something happens on the Iran war and it looks like the Iran war is going to be longer than we thought. And what you will get is a collapse in demand for government bonds because of the Iran war. And some of the press has frequently, I think even institutions that should be respected, such as the Financial Times, will say, oh, government bond investors are panicking because of Andy Burnham. And, as soon as I hear that, I would just very quickly I'll look at Bloomberg, and you can see what is happening to all of the government bond markets around the world. And you'll see that obviously because the whole world is affected by the Iran war, all of the bonds around the world will move. So the interest rates for basically every country in the world on a big day might go up by 0.15%, 0.2%. And it's very easy. I can pull up, I'm looking at it right here. You can see what's happened to Germany, UK, France, Italy, Spain, USA, Japan, Australia. And you'll be very able to see that what's happening is international. And if something happens in Iran and something happens to Andy Burnham and government bond prices move in every country in the Western world, that's probably not caused by Andy Burnham, right? That's going to be caused by the Iran war. And these stories keep happening again and again and again over the last 3 months. And they are, and I don't know Andy Burnham, I've never met Andy Burnham, but these stories, if I'm totally honest, are and have been repeatedly completely idiotic to the point that they're basically verging on propaganda. So the first misconception is that...
Why is he surprised? That's my question. He's sitting here talking about some, I imagine it's just some popular news outlet in the UK. He's shocked at his propaganda. Always is, right? And it's not even intentionally per se. Sometimes probably is, but most times just people just another stupid person presenting another stupid uninformed opinion thinking it's correct because they're not informed. But they don't know that.
The global bond market crisis is caused specifically by Andy Burnham, which is nonsense. But we must also talk now.
That person probably really believes this shit.
Bond markets. And the second one, which is where we have to be a little bit more critical of Andy Burnham, is an idea that often gets repeated on the left, by different sections on the left, which is basically that bond markets are dickheads. They shouldn't be in charge of the country. Get rid of them. And this is a sentiment which I totally understand. Anybody who knows about my history and has read my book will know that I'm not the biggest cheerleader for financial traders. And of course, your government and your economic decisions should not be being dominated by a bunch of traders in the city. But the problem with that is quite simply this graph, which you've used a number of times. We'll flash up maybe here. And this graph, which I've used a number of times on the channel, is a graph of UK and various other countries' government wealth over time. So a big thing which we are really keen to educate on this channel is that wealth exists. It is important. It's important who owns it. It is real. It's not just money in the bank. It's about who owns real resources. And back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, up until the early 80s, Western governments were big owners of wealth. Governments own huge amounts of wealth. And since the 80s, since the sort of changes in the way we think about economics, largely pushed by Ronald Reagan in the States, Margaret Thatcher here, there has been a change in the way we treat government wealth, the way we think about government wealth. And that has led to a decision over the long term to significantly decrease the share of the real wealth in the economy owned by governments. And in the UK, since the 80s, the share of the UK economy, UK wealth owned by government has gone from plus 100% of GDP, so the UK government owning lots of stuff, not being
see that graph too,
to negative 100% GDP, which is the UK government not really owning anything and being massively in debt. And alongside that, we can show you this graph now, which is UK government debt as a percentage of GDP, and you will see that has been statistically, structurally growing over a long period of time. This is the reason why when people on the left, well, not just on the left, but this sentiment does tend to come from the left, say bond markets, we don't need to worry about them, we can do whatever we want. That is quite naive because when you look at the long-term trajectory of not just UK government wealth, but basically every Western government wealth, and also not just UK government debt, but long-term UK government debt, there has clearly been a long-term strategy of Western governments, both on the centre-left and the centre-right, to basically dissave assets and become long-term dependent on increases of borrowing. So what this means is, whereas governments used to own assets, which meant they could provide you with public services using those assets, they have chosen to get rid of those assets, transfer those assets to the wealthy, and replace the way that they fund your government services, rather than providing you government services using assets that they, the government, own. They now provide you government services by borrowing money from the rich, and they borrow more and more money from the rich every year, and especially whenever there is any sort of long-term major crisis, 2008, COVID, even now the Iran war, the energy price crisis that just came out of COVID. Every single time that happens, the structural response of the UK government, of the US government, of Western governments, Biden did this enormously, Joe Biden in the US, the structural response of governments, well, because it's not even a left-right issue, because Donald Trump has also, again, significantly...
the thing is, what I need to know what assets he's referring to, because at the end of the day, the argument he's making, it's going to boil down to the same shit. Sure, let's just suppose the government had all these assets. not mean they're gonna manage it properly, and then you're back in the same fucking dilemma anyways. So like, what is the point of making this argumentation? I mean, we'll see if he mentions any specific examples to kind of dive into it a bit more, but my first thought as of now.
Whenever anything happens in politics or in economics, political parties of the centre left and the centre right respond by trying to borrow money from rich people. Now, if your whole economic plan for 40 years has been we're going to give all of our assets to rich people and just borrow money from rich people, you can't really turn around and say, well, fuck 'em, you know, because and this is the reason why I campaign for and have campaigned for such a long time on the necessity of taxing rich people. Because once you move into this situation where the assets are increasingly owned by rich people, assuming the thing which is obviously true, which is you, regular people, need access to assets like buildings, like hospitals, like schools, like food, like homes, like water, like energy, you need to have some way of getting access to those assets. And you basically have a choice to make, right? Which is either you tax rich people or you borrow from rich people. And I sometimes get very frustrated because I've been trying to convince like the UK political left for more than 10 years now, since way before I started this channel, that they need to be more serious about building their capacity to tax the very rich. And in many cases, there's not been much appetite for that. And now we have people on the left who have not really supported our campaign to build structural capacity to tax the rich and have built their whole economic long-term plan on borrowing from the rich, turning around and saying, well, who gives a about the bond markets? If your entire economic strategy is to borrow money from rich people, then you will be a slave to the bond markets. And if you do not want to be a slave to the bond markets, the only way you can do that is to sort out your capacity to tax very rich people. These guys own all of the assets. If you are unable to tax them, then you will be unable to access the physical assets and wealth that you need to sustain a good economy without borrowing from them, and you will continually be a slave to the bond markets. All right, and now this is the third one, which I have been asked a couple of times in recent interviews, because I'm on the press campaign for my upcoming documentary, keep an eye out, which is that wealth taxes will be punished by the bond markets. And this, it reminds me of the Economist video we did a few weeks ago, where the economists were like, we hate wealth taxes, we love inheritance taxes, without realizing that from the perspective of the very rich, they're like structurally, functionally like the same tax. Which is, it just reveals just like a fundamental like economic incompetence. And I think it reveals this way that people kind of like anthropomorphize the bond markets, as if the bond markets are like the disembodied spirit of Margaret Thatcher that just hate anything that seems vaguely left wing. What the bond markets want is their money back. Okay, the bond markets want high taxes and low government spending. That doesn't mean that's what you should do, but that's what the bond markets want. Right? And if you increase your capability to tax very rich people, that increases your ability to keep inflation low and can pay your creditors back. If you don't bring in your ability to tax rich people, it will become like the very, very rich. As they get richer and richer and richer, and the rest of society gets poorer.
Is it me, or
poorer,
did he just like completely
butcher
that?
Okay, the bond market just reveals that wealth taxes will be punished by the bond markets, and this
they will, right? That's the whole fucking point.
Reminds me of the
like then he goes on to say what?
Just like a fundamental exercise, the bond markets, as if the bond markets are like the disembodied. Bond markets want high taxes and low government spending. That doesn't mean that's what you should do, but that's what the bond markets want. Right? And if you increase your capability to tax very rich people, that increases your ability to keep inflation low and can pay your
No, it doesn't. Because what if they just fucking leave? What if they just fucking leave? Of course the bond traders are gonna be concerned. You're essentially your revenue is fucking leaving the country if you raise the taxes on them.
You don't bring in your ability to tax rich people, it will become like the very, very rich. As they get richer and richer and richer, and the rest of society gets poorer and poorer and poorer, it will become increasingly very, 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 very difficult for governments to support the poor, support public services, support the welfare state, and pay their creditors back. And I think it's like painfully obvious. Like the best thing that you can do in order to reassure your creditors is build the capacity to tax very rich people. And anyone who doesn't see that
exit tax is a thing. It's not enough of a thing. These bond maturities go on like, first of all, like it's like a perpetual thing, right? Like this has been happening for a long period of time and will continue to happen in the future. So sure, let's just say that there's exit tax and these people say, fuck it, I'm taking the hit and I'm getting out of here. Well, you're still left holding the bag now, exit tax or not. Like sure, that money is like a nice helpful short-term solution, but you've now lost all future tax revenue from that entity and anything related associated to them in the future. Like Elon Musk, for example, is like another example of people that say like, oh, or just like in general, like any kind of like Mag 7 or any large company CEO, and they're like, oh, they don't pay enough taxes, blah blah blah. But like, are there not a shit ton of Tesla dealers and factories that have a shit ton of employees that are all paying taxes? that money came from Tesla, right? So like, sure, perhaps you cannot make the statement directly that like, oh, Elon Musk paid X amount in taxes, but you're still extracting a tremendous amount of tax money from all of his companies.
Obviously what the bond market wants is basically a little bit dumb. But I think when we talk about this idea of like...
he better address that point, right? Because this guy certainly knows that people will leave if they raise the taxes. And if he doesn't address that after making that statement, then that is the kind of reason why I don't like this guy, right? Because he makes these like disingenuous arguments and leaves out points that will change someone listening's mind.
We try to tax the rich, it'll be bad for the bond markets. I think in order to understand this conceptually, I think it's important to recognize that high levels of debt, government debt, literally are wealth inequality. I'm going to unpack that a little bit because I think it's an important like conceptual idea that you need to understand, right? Like, wealth inequality is not an abstract thing. Right?
I don't think I'm going to be able to finish. Got like 10, 15 minutes left.
A certain amount of physical wealth in this world. Land, houses, building, natural resources, skyscrapers, all of these things. And all of those resources are owned by somebody. And the wealth distribution is who owns those resources. And on top of the distribution of the literal ownership of real physical resources, we also have debt, which is a zero-sum game, which is some people are in credit and other people are in debt, right? Low wealth inequality means the resources are owned in large part by ordinary people and governments. Okay, yeah, there are some people who own a bigger share, but broadly everybody owns a bit. And low wealth inequality means that you don't have one group of society.
I don't remember if he addresses the escape of the wealthy. I don't think he does, sorry. Yeah, I don't know why people don't like... it just seems disingenuous. And also it seems like people never consider that. Whenever I have these conversations with people in real life, it's like they don't even consider the fact that people will just fucking leave. Which is like such an odd point of view to have, especially in the modern day.
Society heavily indebted to a tiny minority. High wealth inequality means the vast majority of the assets in this country, in the world, are owned by a tiny minority of people, and also the majority of people are indebted by a large amount to the very rich. This is literally what wealth inequality is. And I want you to understand that wealth inequality is not just about wealth, it is about power. Because who owns the resources is who is allowed to consume and who is allowed to decide how the physical resources of the physical world are used. And if you have governments that own a big chunk of wealth and are not massively indebted to the rich, then governments have a lot of freedom to do what they want. And that is why, in that post-war period...
This is like, I don't know, the deeper we're getting into this video, the more I'm starting to get pissed off, to be honest. Because, like, I think most people can agree at this point that government doing exactly what he just described would not be ideal, right? Like, let's just say, I don't know, let's just take, I don't know. What would be like an example? Like an energy company, okay, that has existed in the private sector, run by a highly competent person, and then you just control that company to just the government. Do people really think that these random government employees or like politicians that have no experience in this sector or running any kind of business are just going to show up and effectively do it better than these people already were? What's the probability of that? Like fucking 1%, if that, being generous? Kind of ridiculous.
From the end of the Second World War up until the 80s, when Western governments...
Plus, like, free markets balance out, right? If one person is not doing it effectively, a competitor will beat them. Founding fathers want to eliminate taxes on poor and only tax those above a certain income. Interesting. I can't say I'm too aware of like the US's history and whatnot. But that's something that like Jeff Bezos suggested somewhat recently.
Amounts of wealth, and I want to make it clear, this is about owning productive assets, schools and hospitals and land and houses, right? When they own those assets.
Another example, schooling, right? Let's just look at the data for schooling in the US. It's right in front of your face. The money that was being tossed in there and ramped up, and what was the outcome? Worse and worse education.
the ownership of those assets, combined with the lack of being massively indebted to the rich, gave them the power to provide ordinary people like your parents, like your grandparents, with things like education and healthcare and housing and affordable food. They own the assets produce the things that you need, so they could provide you with the things that you need because they own them. Now, your government does not own those assets are owned by the rich, and on top of that, your government is in debt to the rich, which means that your government needs to pay a significant amount of interest to the rich every year. And what that means is your government, and essentially you as a taxpayer, have become, in a very real way, debt slaves to the rich. You don't own assets anymore. They own the assets. You need the assets to
And also,
live,
right,
and you
another
need to pay
thing he
them.
didn't address about these bond traders. Like, what did he first mention when he was explaining the video of why they issue these bonds? Because they need the money. So what does he suggest instead? Where do you want to get this money from if you're not going to get it from people that are engaging in the bond markets? And you need it.
X amount of money every year on top of the money you need to get access to those assets. Because not only do you not own the assets, you are in.
I think government water is a valid argument. What government water? But I want to focus on the government not selling assets to wealthy. And stop doing that. I'm happy. I'm not sure. I haven't heard any compelling argument about these assets being sold yet.
So there's no point complaining about the fact that the bond market runs your government if you are not willing to actively fight against wealth inequality, because they're the same fucking thing. If you don't want your government to be totally dominated by a bunch of traders in the city, then don't give all of your fucking assets to fucking 20 fucking guys. You know, I did my video last week on Elon Musk, right? What I'm trying to do, the whole thing I'm trying to do on this channel is to make you realize wealth inequality is not some abstract thing. It's about who owns your fucking country. It's about who owns your planet, who owns your houses, who owns your food, who owns your ability to produce all of the things that you need, right? So there's no point. What really frustrates me is I continually see people like upset about the consequences of extreme inequality, which is we don't get any access to things that we need: housing, education, healthcare, food, leisure time, anything, opportunities, but unwilling to fight the obvious cause, which is, again, I'll show this graph, you've given them all of your fucking assets. If they've got the assets and you are in debt to them, then you are their slave. And that's how it's going to be. And that's how it's going to be. I worry because obviously, here in the UK, we're going to get a new prime minister. And I hope that I've been cleared. I support that decision because we were never going to get what we needed under Keir Starmer, and I hope they win under Burnham. But I worry that this new government, and there's no wood to touch. I hope that they don't. But
I'll just read this real quick. So I'm curious what he's talking about in the video he referenced. Like, I just, this guy, man. I mean, this video just seems like a bunch of nonsense as well.
I worry they're going to come in and repeat the same mistake that Starmer made, which was the same mistake that Biden made, which is the same mistake that basically every...
Like, let's just think of Amazon as an example, right? People sit here bitching about Amazon and hoarding wealth, ultra rich. But like, meanwhile, let's just think about Amazon. You can literally go online, buy whatever the fuck you want at a lower cost than you used to be able to. So everything is cheaper and you can get it immediately. Like fucking same day delivery or next day delivery, like worst case most of the time. Is that a net negative for society or is that a net positive? Can someone answer me? Like,
Well, it's the same mistake that Macron made, the same mistake that Merz made, which is just fundamental naivety about the importance of who owns your wealth. If you do not...
I watch a lot of this guy's videos. There's one of the few made interesting point. Government needs to stop selling assets. I hope we make it to it. I don't know.
About the situation, which is not just existing, but progressively worsening every year, which is, your government, your middle class, your working class has less and less wealth every day and more debt to the super rich every day.
I'm waiting for somebody to come over. They just got home from work and they're just like showering and then coming here. So whenever she messages me that she's on the way, I don't have much time. I'm on the clock at that point.
Thing about that, then you will inevitably be, I'm really pleased that we're getting watched all over the world, because I want other countries that are not in such an extreme situation as the UK to recognize this is what will happen to you. And it's happening in Italy, it's happening in France, it's going to happen in the US.
This is basically the end. Well, then he hasn't addressed the selling of assets then.
We'll live in countries where we can vote red, blue, whoever.
I'm not sure what your point
and the
is.
people in charge are 300 traders in the city. That is what happens if you don't have wealth, and if you are in debt, it doesn't matter who's in power, because they have no power. They have no wealth, they have no power, and the only way you take that power back for regular people, for democratically elected governments, is to fix your distribution of wealth. And the only way you will ever achieve that is serious taxation of the extremely rich. But it's not just governments. It's not just government. Same thing's happening in housing. If your government has no wealth, it cannot provide you with a good welfare state. But if you, as ordinary families, have no wealth, then you are not going to be able to outcompete the rich for housing. You won't get housing. And you're not going to be able to outcompete the rich for food, and you won't get food. This is. I'm really hoping that the point I'm getting through to you here is wealth inequality is not an abstract concept. It is about who is allowed to live in a home, who is allowed to have education, who is allowed to have healthcare, who is allowed to have holidays, who is allowed to have leisure time, who is allowed to have retirements. That is what wealth inequality is. There are not infinite amounts of all of these things. And if we allow ourselves to exist in mathematical systems where every single day these guys are losing share and these guys are gaining share, then your share will get less and less. And that is why you can't afford a house. And that is why in many cases, ordinary families can't afford food and heating. Right? That is why you can't afford a pension like your dad had. That is why you'll never be able to retire. We do not live. I get people always say zero sum. We do not live in infinite sum game.
The rest is ranting. Bonds are sometimes tied to assets. During repossession, bondholders get the underlying assets.
Right? And if we have trillionaires increasing their wealth at 40% a year, this is what you get. This is what you get. No food, no housing, and governments which can't do anything. And this is why the UK situation is actually...
And the other thing about Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire that he's ignoring is well, I mean, whatever. I guess the summary in the video made a note that he addressed it, but it's just on paper, right? It's not like real wealth. And also that the market agrees with.
The UK has the highest borrowing costs of any major Western nation, and that is bad, very clearly, and that is why the UK government so much has its hands tied, and it's so limited in what it can do. And I think whatever you say about Keir Starmer, I think he probably did want to do more than he could do, but he was very quickly disciplined.
And the other thing is even if we assume that everything this guy is saying in this video is, let's just make the argument that everything this guy is saying is correct, blah, 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 whatever. You end up back at the same point eventually, right? Where you are this nation state who needs money for some reason, and then you get back into this bond loop. So are you really addressing any long-term solution with what you're proposing? Not really. You're just restarting the cycle.
He was essentially deposed a year and a half ago and just sort of had to sit on his own grave for a year and a half on his way out. The UK government is probably the first government in the Western world that has reached...
Elon has a separate class of shares. Yeah, he's like super shares, right? Whatever they're called. So he's in control of the whole company. Yeah, but what I'm saying in regards to that is the market is what's giving value to those shares, right? The market is deciding for itself, are these shares worth this nominal amount or not? And so far, that's what they have decided. So clearly they see value in it. Honestly, governments should stop being irresponsible and stop borrowing excessively and never borrow money. I don't know if I agree with that. Borrowing can be pretty overpowered, right? If you can borrow money and you have a guaranteed way to pay it back, you can make pretty good use of the borrowed money. So you're telling me that if you had the opportunity to borrow money at 0% interest, you wouldn't borrow it and do something useful with that money? It's kind of a wasted opportunity, right?
Reach this point where it is no longer able to provide the things that its citizens need by running. I'll again show this graph down. What this graph of government wealth going down shows you is that for a long period of time now, Western governments have been providing you, Western people, most of my views are in the West, with a decent quality of life by basically selling the family silver.
That's different. It's a strategy. I'm talking about borrowing because you're in a jam. Suppose it depends. Shows lack of foresight for problems, lack of planning, no savings account, etc. I mean, yeah, sure, in some cases, but like I'm sure we could both sit here and come up with some pretty would be like, understandable reasons that someone found themselves in that scenario. Just like a string of unlucky situations happen to them, kind of thing. And then they don't really have a choice. But in general, yeah, in general, people shouldn't just be borrowing and pissing away their money, being irresponsible.
Western governments were able to accumulate a big chunk of wealth during World War II, just after World War II, and they have been providing you with good standard of living by selling that stuff back to the rich and by going in debt to the rich. That is obviously never sustainable. You can only sell your assets once. The rich will only allow you to get into so much debt before they stop lending. And the UK government has been the first one to hit that wall where they can no longer do this, to be honest, in my opinion, frankly stupid thing that Western governments have been doing for 40 years of saying, let's just give all our debt to the rich and people who have no capacity to tax. You hit that wall and you can no longer borrow, you can no longer sell off your assets, and now you have to choose. And I think we are at such an interesting time here in the UK because we're about to get a new Prime Minister. And I worry, if I'm honest, that he will be advised that he can get through this with some sort of financial economic jiggery-pokery whilst that wealth transfer is ongoing, and that will not work. The UK government now is faced with the three clear options, which increasingly will be the only three options available to any Western government, which is either significantly increased taxation on the very, very, very rich centimillionaires, billionaires, significantly increased taxes on working people, higher earning working people, or continue the gradual shutting down of the welfare state, which has been happening for the last 15 years in this country. Those are the only three options. Those are the only three options. And I want you, the viewer, and I want Andy Burnham, who will be the new UK Prime Minister soon, to be aware of that. There are no other options. Those are your three options. And I absolutely guarantee you that we in the UK, and you wherever you are watching, will see in the course of the next 10 years, your government do a significant amount of at least one, probably a combination of two of these three things, which is significantly increased taxation of the very rich, significantly increased taxation of working people, or the dismantling of the welfare state that your fucking grand.
Okay, 1 year fine. How many years has the US government carried a debt? Dear Lord, I have a budget deficit since like 2000. Yeah, but it's not as simple as that, right? Like because you have to address the whole growth, like what he was talking about at the start, like the inflation and growth and whatnot. It's like a factor. If you're like a strong growth trends, it's not like the biggest deal.
Grandparents being died for. Right, these are your three options. And I want you to know that because I'm aware, and I've been saying this quite a bit recently, that there are some like moderately rich people who might be worth 1 or 2 million, or people with good jobs, who don't like my ideas, don't like this channel, so they want me out of the picture. So let's say you get me out of the picture, bam, you can't tax the super rich anymore. You are then faced with only two options, which are significantly raised taxation on working people, including high earners, or the dismantling of the welfare state.
Okay, the second one happens anyways, right? Like it's already happening now in the US, right? But first, they proposed what we were just talking about in the last All In podcast, right? If anyone's been seeing this like Ro Khanna guy on Twitter, first they proposed a billionaire tax, and now they're already starting to propose for like centimillionaires and whatnot. And when they all leave, where's that tax coming from? It's the working class.
Maybe you're thinking, well, that's fine because what I'll fight for is the dismantling of the welfare state. So once we dismantle the welfare state, and we enormously increase poverty in your country, we close down all the schools, we close down all the hospitals, millions of people lose their jobs, and all of that wealth is accumulated by the very rich. What do you think happens next? What do you think happens next?
They're just being greedy, striving for maximum growth without regard to consequences of excessive debt. Yeah, in some capacity, sure. Like you have to realize, like the US is in a unique position, right? We're the global reserve currency, so they get to do that. Part of the position they put themselves in. But yeah, I mean, I think everyone realized, like, knows that this is like something has to change long term. Either we have to like hit an extreme period of growth, which is possible, or like, yeah, the debt's just gonna blow out of control, right?
If we don't deal with the taxation of the super rich now, there's only one other option, which is a fight to the death between the poor and the middle. And whichever one of those you're on, if you think you're going to win, what happens when the other side's gone? This aggressive growth of the wealth of billionaires, there is a mathematical inevitability to this, and there is a historical inevitability as well. you know, read your history and understand that the past 2,000 years of human history is in 10 guys living like kings while everyone else in starves on the streets. That is all of human history, except for the last 70 years. And we only managed to provide these things, which we're losing now. You know, a welfare state, you know, education, healthcare. You know, the kind of education and healthcare that I've had and my dad had. My grandparents and great-grandparents could never even dream of that. You know what I mean? The kind of secure housing, the kind of secure food. But it's important to recognise they did that by taxation of the very rich. So that's it. That's the end of this week's video. And again, you know, I've made a little bit of a turn back to these more depressing videos. But the reason I've done that is because we're going to have a new government here in the UK.
Very
I'm totally honest. And you know, I've come out and I've told people to vote for Andy Burnham. I've told people to vote for Labour in the recent by-election, which has got him into this.
Disingenuous video. Say that. Like, I really don't like when people make such bold statements like that, and especially in the case of this guy, because I know almost for sure that this guy knows the other arguments and doesn't even address it. And it's part of the reason why I hate like politics too, right? Because a lot of times people like will make arguments based on like the omission of data as opposed to like a valid point, a knowing omission. And like they just prey on people that don't bother to educate themselves on it. And especially in the case like this, where it's like, if you were to sit down and have this debate with any person, the same things that I'm saying are the same things anyone else will respond with immediately. So it's like you're not even going to address like the first depth of level of the argument. Oh. But yeah, I got out of here. He messaged me like towards like the last few minutes of that video, so we're trying to kind of wrap up the stream and we're done. We're out of here. Yeah, we could have done it, but done it responsibly. We just need to be marginally. Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the problem of like the political cycle that we're in, right? Or at least like the US is in. It's like, well, whether it's the left or the right, it's just like free shit if you vote for us. On top of this like spent like this waste and fraud that's not being addressed. I was gonna say, enjoy time with your friends and write them a letter. Not gonna write them a letter. And yeah, no, I'm still chilling at home. I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm just like probably gonna watch something, have a drink, chill. Yeah. In terms of this trading shit, though, not really much to talk about, right? Kind of everything that we said at the start of the stream still applies. I mean, my first question is going to be if we start to like actually fail up here, right? Start losing this level. In which case, this like potential rotation is in play if we start building more time down here. Only question is, do we have enough volume to make that move in the weekend? I don't know. And I think that this is the zone that we were talking about. I think it's on the TPO, like this block and this block are the same, right? So that's why there's like two different point of controls right now. But I just put it here because it matches like the volume one. And this is where like the cluster that we were talking about, like liquidity is, so. And other than that, we already talked about the downside zones. So nothing, no real change there. Coming over next time, need a drink. Yeah, I've been drinking more, we'll say that. I've been drinking more. So I've been doing a lot more stuff. While I was like not here, back in Toronto, I've just been doing a lot more stuff. Like dating a lot, seeing friends a lot. Also like met some traders. Went to some cool events. Yeah, in terms of the juice box stuff, you basically just watched yesterday's stream and the one from Tuesday. I talked about everything, and the start of this stream when we were talking about the levels of interest. And in terms of the rest of the weekend, we'll see. We'll see. If anything, it'll be like today. We're kind of just hop on. Like if I do find some period of time where I'm going to be home chilling for a bit, I'll hop on even if it's not the longest stream. And then we'll kind of be back into the full swing of things next week until I have to go. For now, I'm out here though. I got my ass moving, so we're not gonna make this too long-winded. Shout out to Dev, right? Shout out to Dev, yapping up a storm, talking about them bonds. I'm out here though. I'll be seeing y'all. Shout out to you though. Later.